here, but 1, 2, 3, 4.
Lisa's here.
Patrick, I won't see. Do we have Councilman Halliburton?
He's just connecting.
Great. Oh, there you are, Councilman. Great. Well, now we are all here. So welcome everybody on an early Tuesday morning after a long weekend. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Agent.
Yes.
Clegg.
Here.
Halliburton.
Here.
Sanchez.
Here.
Thompson.
Here.
Woodings.
Here.
All present.
Well, welcome everyone. We've got all of our department heads here as well. Before we turn this over, I just thought I'd kick us off. I'm really looking forward to this conversation today. It's a workshop leading up to a workshop so that we have the opportunity to hear from all the department heads, talk about priorities, and then prep some for our longer full day session that'll take place towards the end of the month. I want to thank all of our staff who have, in this unprecedented time, really been working in new ways, tackling challenges that none of us would have expected. Many of you worked all weekend, and I apologize for that because we have a workshop after a long weekend, and it was long for many of you in a different way. But I really appreciate that you're getting the work done for our residents. Each of you as department heads who are here and office leaders of various offices in the city, from first responders to cleaning staff and the finance team through the librarians who have changed some of what you've done in order to accomplish the goals for our city. And I just want to kick that off with a thanks. I'm hearing a lot from the public these days, and there are many of the concerns that I've heard the last year are ringing louder now, given the crisis that we're in, the need to create opportunity for everyone, address affordable housing. Like this council and I really am committed to looking at how we rebuild public transportation to connect people with opportunity, recognizing that now there's somewhat of a discomfort in using it and we need to build that again. And of course, all that is rooted in the need to build opportunity for everyone so that we can thrive here. And it's more important now, I think, given the economic impacts and the crisis that we've experienced, that we've all worked together as a team. So really appreciate that. And this, each of the departments, I just want to say that the work that you've done to date in reviewing all the materials you sent through the course of the weekend and last week really reflects that you're thinking about how we create a city for everyone. Oh, sorry guys, a city for everyone, and that you're focused on ensuring in this tough time that we're able to invest for prosperity in the long run, and really appreciate that. So look forward to the conversation from hearing from each of the departments with recommendations, and of course the conversation that we have with council today, and then the next steps after. So is it you, Eric, that's kicking off, or is Jade kicking us off?
Mayor, I think I'm going to kick it off.
Great.
So let me just share my screen. Great. Thank you, Mayor. Members of the council, can you guys see my screen okay?
Yes.
Great, thanks. So I'll start off just providing an agenda for what we're going to cover this morning. So the first portion of our presentation, I will just be doing a general fund overview, going through our revenues and expenses, as well as hitting on some of the themes that are contained within our budget, hitting on the economic environment, so on and so forth. Then we'll get into...
Madam Mayor, Eric, but real quick, I'm not sure if you know this, but you're in presenter view for us. So we can see both your slide that you're on and your next slide in your notes.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
No problem.
Is it still in presenter mode?
It is.
It is.
Let's see here. I might need somebody to help me.
Which,
Eric,
if
it's
you
Erica.
go back.
I think-
Oh yeah, go ahead, Erica.
I was just gonna say, I think if you share your other screen, then we'll see the actual presentation and not your personal
Okay.
screen.
Okay.
I think if you just hit from the beginning there, maybe.
Yeah, or worst case, we can view from
Yeah.
this screen quite well.
Yeah.
Eric, there's also a checkbox up there on that same screen you were just on to turn off presenter view.
Uh,
Yep, right there.
Thank you.
Perfect.
Is that better?
now hit from the beginning, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. We can see it good.
You can see it. Okay.
I would just hit from the beginning, Eric. That way we don't have to see all of your screen.
All right. I'm hitting from the beginning and it's not.
Ah, technology.
Okay. If you bear with me, I'm going to just share my other screen. Apologies. Okay. This is not working.
I think even with the small little screens on the left, I could see it pretty good. It wasn't in presenter mode. It was just large with all of them on the left. I think that was fine. Like that.
Okay. Great.
And Eric, if you just minimize your ribbon, that'll make it a little bit bigger.
Yeah. There we go. Is that okay?
That's great. Thank
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for bearing with me. I'm sorry. So getting back to our agenda here, we'll do kind of a summary of the general fund budget. Then we will get into the department presentations. Within those department presentations, we'd anticipate, 5, no more than 10 minutes per, with the goal of kind of providing context for what's contained within this budget, what is contained within our forecast, and then determining topics that we would want to bring back to the council, whether it be before the budget workshop, at the budget workshop, or even after. We'll go through our priority-based budgeting. I've got a few slides on that. And then we can talk about some of our upcoming presentations. I'll actually start with what we have slotted in for the next several weeks, just to provide context. So as we hit on some of these themes throughout the course of the morning, there'll be some assurance that we'll be coming back with additional details on those items. So first, we would propose next week coming back with a more detailed discussion around the COVID reimbursements, potential opportunities to use some of those reimbursements as pass-through grants for the community, so on and so forth. We'll also hear from the airport. We'll provide an overview of their budget. We heard from the Public Works Enterprise Funds, last week, and we would hear from the airport coming up. The week of June 9th, we would propose a housing discussion where we would hear some additional detail on the proposed CIP investments and strategy around that. The following week, we would have a discussion around our library system and the downtown library as well. And that discussion would be a joint city council and library trustees discussion. The June 23rd date is the date of our workshop. So at that workshop, we oftentimes have discussions on specific topics as well. So in addition to hearing about, the general fund budget and the budget as a whole, we'd also propose a discussion around our parks capital program. There's been interest expressed around hearing about parks to be developed, what's coming in future years, so on and so forth. So as we go through this discussion this morning, we would be interested in hearing if there are any other areas that council would like specific updates on over the course of the coming weeks. So moving into the meat of our discussion today. So we've talked about some of our goals in previous presentations. Some of the goals that we've discussed, including protecting our financial resources to ensure that we can continue to deliver our core services and preserve our capital fund balance as well as our cash flow reserve. A key component of this budget proposed would be limiting property tax growth. And we've talked about the 2% versus the 3% recommendation. Ensuring that city resources can be used to help spur the economy and work towards investments geared towards recovery as we work through this COVID crisis. And then finally, ensuring that our public engagement is robust and that we are communicating and with our with our community members and seeking feedback on this budget. So,
Madam Mayor, can I interrupt just quickly on that one?
Sorry, yes, I was on mute. Go ahead.
Thank you. Eric, I know that other council members are also interested in the public engagement. If I was reading through the stuff I got over the weekend correctly, we're not preparing to do anything before we release the recommended budget. And wondered if we can at least do something online so that by the time the budget is in recommendation, we've gotten some feedback on that.
Thank you, Councilmember. I can talk with Maria, our Director of Community Engagement, and work to develop some sort of strategy around that.
Yeah, and just to jump in there, that's a great suggestion, Council President. With that memo, Maria was seeking feedback so that if there's things that have been missed or that we should add or could add, she'd like to hear that.
Moving to some of our economic indicators that helped frame the recommendations included within this budget. Obviously, we've seen a dramatic change in the economy over the last couple of months. And these indicators are largely national. Retail sales have been down considerably year over year. In the month of April, they were down almost 22% as compared to last year. And if you think about retail sales, that is a key component of what generates sales tax, which is one of our major revenue categories. Manufacturing, there was a significant decline in the month of March. As we look at unemployment, we've seen record levels in Idaho, 11.5% in the month of April, which exceeds the Great Recession peak. The national rate at 14.4%, and a note that the job losses have disproportionately impacted lower wage earners. Housing starts were down in the month of April as compared to the prior year. We've obviously seen declining consumer confidence and dramatic declines in the stock market.
Madam Mayor.
Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you, Eric. I appreciate that. I just have a question about the economic indicators. Are these specific to Boise, Idaho? Is this nationwide? What do these kind of mean?
Thank you, Council Member. With the exception of that Idaho unemployment rate, all the others are national.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. So, as we go into more of the substance, I just wanted to provide a high-level overview of some of the themes included in the budget, the proposed budget for fiscal year 2021, specific to the general fund. So the first one is, we are, in the midst of what is likely to be a recession. We're also, in this period of economic uncertainty. So as we've discussed in previous sessions, I think we're going to need to very frequently review and adjust our revenue estimates and our expenditure assumptions to comport with what's happening in the economy at that point in time. One of the components of this budget is we've adopted this bucket approach in a couple of instances where we've put dollars aside, but we're going to make recommendations once we have a better understanding of what the economy will look like. And largely that approach helps maximize flexibility. So if the economy does, take a turn or not improve in ways that we hope that it will, we will have the ability to respond rather than allocating those resources for specific purposes. The general fund budget for fiscal year 2021 is essentially flat as compared to fiscal year 2020. It's approximately 0.25% growth. The property tax growth rate is lower than in prior years. The recommendation is a 2% growth versus the max 3%. When we look at all of our other revenue categories, almost across the board, there have been projected declines built into our estimates as compared to the current year. Included in the recommendation is really kind of this simultaneous effort to reduce costs, and we'll see that in a few different areas. There are a number of citywide strategic investments that we'll discuss, especially when we get into the department presentations. And then we still need to ensure that we can support normal cost increases, growth in M&O activities, growth in salary and benefits, and so on and so forth. And then the last thing would be we have established a COVID reserve as a component of this budget that we have established to aid us in fiscal year 2021 if we see revenue come in even lower than we've built in, or we have unanticipated costs associated with that event.
Madam Mayor.
Go ahead.
Thanks. Just a quick note here as we move into this next year. One of the things that I'm doing with the program that I manage in my other job is developing a risk analysis that provides some discussion and certainty going forward about the direction you might take depending on which direction the various indicators go. And I'd like to discuss maybe after we get through budget, maybe the next thing we should do is understand all of the different directions that might happen and at least have some idea how we would respond to each of those directions. I think it helps both us and the general public deal with the uncertainty maybe a little better. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Madam President, I think that that's a great suggestion and something that we could do as we begin to have more regular work sessions again, department by department, is work through in a year where once we've finished this budget, where we're looking strategically at the whole next year, how like the different scenarios that could play out.
just to provide a high level overview, and we'll get into some of the subcomponents later in the slide deck here. But you can see the 0.25 is actually 0.26% growth rate, as well as the various components that make up our revenues and our expenditures. When we look at our revenues, property tax makes up almost, actually a little bit more than 2/3 of our overall general fund revenue budget. You can see on the left, on the pie chart there, some of our other significant revenue categories, departmental revenue and sales tax being the two largest ones after property tax. And on the right, you can see the year-over-year change in each of those categories. And you can see, starting with development fees, reduction of 13.6% as compared to the fiscal year 2020 budget. Sales tax declines, fines and forfeitures, franchise fees, all the way down through departmental revenue. The two categories that we have projected growth in, property tax and liquor tax. That property tax of 3.6% comprised of the 2% for base growth and 1.6% new construction associated with new payers. And on the far right of that table, we've tried to categorize where there is an ability to impact revenue our revenue collections on an annual basis. So development fees, very little. It's largely attributable to what's happening in the economy. Obviously, the city can choose to adjust fees, which is not a hallmark of this budget for fiscal year 2021, but that would be one way to adjust revenue within that category. Sales tax, there's really no ability. The sales tax comes in into a statewide pool and is distributed per a formula. Cities don't have the ability to change sales tax rates. Fines and forfeitures, what makes up that category? There's really two critical components, one being traffic enforcement, and then the other being parking citations. There is some ability based on how we deploy resources to adjust fines and forfeitures. You can see that for fiscal year 2021, we're not building in any kind of an increase, actually the opposite of that. Franchise fees, these are long-term agreements. And this 8% is really probably less to do with COVID than it is adjusting our estimates to be in line with activity levels that we've seen. And we've been trying to chase this category for a little while. Hopefully with this adjustment, we'll be more in line both for fiscal year 2021 and on a go forward. Departmental internal charges is largely our cost allocation plan. So reimbursements from other funds for services that are provided. Our departmental revenue is largely associated with services provided to the community, whether they be our parks and recreation services or services that are provided to other agencies, such as our fire agreements with NACFR and Whitney and the airport, or our police agreement with the airport and BSU. Property tax, we have the option to increase by up to 3% on an annual basis. And liquor tax is, I guess, similar to sales tax in that it comes into a statewide pool, is distributed according to the number of stores and sales within any particular boundary. And that's really how that one is determined.
Madam Mayor.
Go ahead.
Thank you. This is a great slide, Eric. I really appreciate it because it gives a good overview both of what we can impact and how we will be impacted. I would wonder on one of them, particularly development fees, and it may apply to others, rather in addition to looking at just what we can change in terms of what the fees are or how we collect them. This might be an area where either particular strategic investments or particular investments in policy could make a difference. In other words, if we can incent development through either policy change or investments, we might in fact impact how much we get in development fees, which might impact some of those others as well. So like I say, I really appreciate that. I just wondered if you'd also looked at the other side of it, which is incentives and investments.
Thank you, Councilmember. I might propose that when we get into the planning and development services section, that we talk a little bit about that when Mark presents his slides. And I think that's something we can certainly consider as we go forward.
Thank you.
So over the course of the past year and really in years past, we've talked about property tax, and there's really two components of what can change our collections on a year-over-year basis, one being growth and the other being that base increase. And when we talk about growth, the property tax we receive from growth associated with new construction and annexation, we have essentially nexused that to new services that are required to support that growth. So included within this fiscal year 2021 budget, when we look at that growth piece of the 2.6 million, or the 1.6% as shown on the previous slide, there are a number of items that are utilizing that funding. So new police officers, there's a recommendation to add 5 new police officers. Operating costs associated with some of our capital projects, micro district Hayman House, and some of our newer parks. Some citywide strategic initiatives, which Jade will be discussing in a little bit here. Additional support for our information technology department associated with growth, citywide growth, and then department workload initiatives. When we look at the base increase, so the 2% increase, we largely talk about that as our means to keep up with increasing costs for our existing services. So we have salary and benefit growth, albeit reduced in fiscal year 2021, that funding helps support. The COVID reserve that I mentioned on a previous slide, as well as M&O cost increases. And we've really gone through M&O with a fine-tooth comb going into this fiscal year. And in almost all departments, there have been reductions, save for really 2 categories, one being software maintenance and the other being insurance for risk and workers' comp. Those 3 categories, we've seen some growth. In almost all other areas, we've actually built in reductions. As we look at general fund expenditures, you can see on the pie chart that personnel in fiscal year 2021 would make up just under 70% of the budget. Partially, that's reflective of the fact that we have reduced M&O expenses, as I mentioned on the previous slide. The other major categories being M&O, about 15% of our budget. We do an annual transfer to the capital fund, which makes up about 5% of our general fund budget. Our contribution towards VRT is about 3% of our overall budget, or 5% of our property taxes. And you can see the other categories being 2% and 1%. You can see the year-over-year change on the table on the right. When you look at the capital transfer, that number is the number that we've built in for fiscal year 2021 of 12.8 million is really reflective of what we've contributed on an annual basis. The difference being that in fiscal year 2020, there were some one-time dollars that were available when we were building the budget. So we had built in a larger increase on a one-year basis than historically we've included. So the recommendation for fiscal year 2021 while reflecting a decrease here, is really in line with historical standards in terms of what we have supported the capital fund with. And you can see on the last line there that contingencies increase. What's really driving that increase is that COVID reserve, that $3.2 million that we've built in for fiscal year 2021. Obviously, that wasn't a consideration when we built the fiscal year 2020 budget. And I think the capital transfer and that contingency line, there's a strong nexus between the two. The one-time resources that were available in fiscal year 2020 have now been placed towards the contingencies.
Madam Mayor? Eric?
Go ahead, Council. Yep, go ahead.
Thank you. Eric, can you remind me how much is in the COVID reserve this year and proposed next year? I'm blanking on that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Council Member. In the current fiscal year, we don't have a dedicated reserve for COVID, but we are working to minimize any impact to our cash flow reserve or to our capital fund. For fiscal year 2021, which would be the first year we'd have a dedicated reserve for COVID, we are recommending a $3.2 million reserve. And then as we look out into the outer years of the forecast, we have programmed $2.5 million.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor? Madam Mayor?
Go ahead.
Thank you. Eric, for the COVID reserve, what sorts of expenses might be covered with that? How would we use that?
Thank you, Council Member. I think that could be used in numerous ways. On the revenue side, it could be used to offset revenue shortfalls. But to your question on the expenditures, it could be used for enhanced cleaning. Costs that haven't been built into our base. It could be used to support vulnerable members of our community. In the current year, we've had expenses associated with sheltering costs and things of that nature. So I think the proposed uses of that, I think, would be determined based on the need at that time. But I think that any of the expenses that we've seen in the last couple of months could be applicable to that reserve.
Thank you, Eric. And just one follow-up. What would need to happen for that to be triggered for us to actually make use of that?
Councilmember, thank you for that question. I think the first thing would be for us to incur expenses. Secondly, for us not to receive federal reimbursement. So many of the reimbursements that are available to the city could cover us through the end of the calendar year. So to the degree that we have, say, a second wave of this COVID event and it extends into the next calendar year, and there isn't any kind of federal reimbursements available, that could trigger some of those expenses.
Thank you, Eric.
Madam Mayor?
Go ahead.
Thanks. Eric, just a real quick question. I was surprised to see debt services up so much. I know it's a fairly small category, but remind me what is increasing there.
Thank you, Councilmember. I should have called that one out, actually. We were having some back and forth about that one last night over email. That increase is a planned increase. It's not associated with taking on any new debt. There were a couple of fire engines which have been leased, and we're entering the last year of that lease with the option to retain those vehicles. So it's basically the end of that lease.
Okay, thank you.
Looking at expenditure changes proposed for fiscal year 2021, there's a series of reductions, and then there is a series of increases that are proposed. And I won't go into too much detail on some of these because we've covered them in past sessions, but I'll briefly hit on them. Within the expenditure reductions bucket, we implemented, going into fiscal year 2021, position level budgeting, which is a more granular approach to how we develop our budgets. And as a result of that, increased level of granularity, our personnel budgets in the general fund have been reduced by about $1 million. We don't anticipate any service level impacts associated with that. When we look at our M&O, we went through, all the departments went through a pretty extensive evaluation of their M&O expenses and what had been in their tentative budget for fiscal year 2021. And we reduced almost across the board in departments. And it's really more of a realignment or a right sizing exercise. Again, not intended to reduce service levels there, but we were able to adjust based on historical expenditures and realized about $1.4 million in savings there. A component of this budget would be a reduced rate of compensation growth for city employees, both general and contract employees. And there is a $2 million reduction target included in this budget, of which about 400,000 has been identified, and I'll go into on a subsequent slide. And the details on the other $1.6 million, some of those are being developed, and we would hope to have a conclusion on that last 1.6 million by the end of this calendar year. That $2 million target does represent just under 1% of the fiscal year 2021 proposed budget. In terms of expenditure increases, there is limited normal growth. On the personnel side, salaries and benefits, again, on the salary side, we have built in a lower level of compensation growth for employees. On the M&O side, as I mentioned, really the main categories being insurance and software maintenance. We do have some funding built in for some citywide strategic investments, that COVID reserve that we've talked about. There are a series of historical increases, and when I say historical, I'm meaning increases that have been discussed with at the council level for quite some time, and I'll go into what those are in a moment. And then the last item being departmental workload items. So we have essentially built in a bucket of $800,000 into the fiscal year 2021 budget with no specific recommendations at this time on how to utilize that. We know that across the departmental spectrum, and you'll hear from departments in a few minutes about some of the needs that they have, that there are areas where workload is essentially warranting additional resources. What we'd like to do is hold that funding, come back to the council with specific recommendations, but not until we have a better sense of the city's ability to support those expenses, understanding how we landed on that $2 million reduction target, understand the compensation structure at that time, and then really understand what's happening with the economy. Are our revenue estimates looking like they're going to hold up? Are we going to need to utilize that COVID reserve, so on and so forth? So within that $2 million base reduction target, I mentioned that there's about $400,000 in items that have been identified to date. So I'll quickly touch on what those are. Within the fire department, there's been a duties consolidation that has been proposed by the fire department. They've had some vacancies, and as they've incurred those vacancies, they've had an opportunity to look at how they deliver services going forward. And in one particular instance, they looked at a position that they thought could be eliminated because the duties of that position could be redistributed amongst the existing staff. And that position is a higher level position. So you can see that $174,000 in savings. You'll hear from Erica when she does the information technology slide, but we have a recommendation to centralize hardware assets, specifically our PCs, our laptops, and our tablets, and centralizing those budgets within the information technology department, extending the life cycle of those devices by 1 year, and essentially adding a position to manage all of that work. The net result of all of that would be a savings of $55,000 on an annual basis. The third item on this slide, the school resource officer program, that $115,000, that would represent a reimbursement from the West Ada School District for a portion of the costs associated with school resource officers that are placed at high schools within that district. And when we look at that model, it's really a shared model in terms of cost of what's being proposed. There is definitely a benefit to the city by having officers in our schools, and there's also a benefit to the schools. So that $115,000 represents a partial reimbursement for the entire cost of that, and that recommendation is really in line with kind of national standards for how the school resource officer program is generally deployed. There is a recommendation in our public works department to insource utility location services. We do a lot of that work through contracts right now. And by bringing that work in-house, we think that we can save approximately $15,000 on an annual basis. And then there has been a comprehensive review of faxes across the city, and looking at eliminating landlines and moving to a more digital solution when fax technology is still required, which would save approximately $14,000 on an annual basis. There are a series of other areas that staff are currently reviewing to either reduce costs or increase revenues. We're going to be seeking City Council feedback and approval as those evaluations are advanced and completed. And to the degree that there are certain items that maybe take longer, we hope that within fiscal year 2021 we have an appropriate backstop to support that $2 million reduction target. The capital fund balance, which we're working very hard this year to preserve, and we would hope not to go into next year. The COVID reserve, our fuel budgets, we've seen a slight uptick recently, but if you look over the last month or two, fuel prices have definitely declined, and there may be some capacity there. We could look to one-time vacancy and M&O savings and some of our contingency accounts. When we developed the recommendation for the $2 million target, it was really in line with some of the potential opportunities that we saw out there. So there really is a hope that we can realize that $2 million for fiscal year 2021.
Madam Mayor.
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you, Eric. So Eric, the cost savings with the faxes and eliminating that paper use, has there been any consideration of us going completely digital and going paper free?
Councilmember, thank you for that.
I gotta say, I'd really struggle with that. I need my memos.
I completely understand, Mayor.
But it's such a good point.
Yeah, my last workplace, when I had just started working there in the summer of 2015, had just embraced paper-free. And so they were just starting, which was ideal. When I just started, they had just started the paperless. And I have to admit, at first, it was really difficult to make that paradigm shift of not having something in your hands that you could mark up. But eventually, it ended up being something we all embraced. And I have to admit, I was in shock when I joined the city and I realized how much paper we use. It actually made it easier for folks to keep track of documents as well. It's almost like having a virtual filing cabinet, and you can see where documents go. And it didn't take me very long to embrace it, but it's definitely saved us a lot of money. and something that I don't know, I think we might want to look at. And certainly for those of us who still felt the need to have printed documents, we could still do that, but overall it really reduced our paper waste and costs.
Thank you, Council Member. I think that's a good suggestion. And as we're, looking at areas, to evaluate, we can certainly put that one on the list.
The system that we used was called Laserfiche. Laserfiche. I'm sure there's better ones out there, but that's the one that I'm familiar with.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Eric, just for myself as I think this through, I think what I'm seeing here, we've identified potential budget savings. We may not make them all in FY21, but we have enough in various reserves and fund balances that if we had to, say we end up with a idea where those savings will be over a 4 or 5 year period, at the end of the period will be to the full savings. In the meantime, we have to make up one time what the difference is. Is that what I'm hearing you're suggesting, that we potentially could use the COVID reserve or the fuel budgets or the others for?
Councilmember, exactly. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Because that, one of the biggest areas of heartburn for me, and I think for some other council members, approving a budget with reduction targets and not having a strategy for what if. And so I really appreciate this. Thanks.
Thank you. I mentioned on one of the previous slides that there are some historical or long-standing priority expenditure increases included as part of this budget. And what those items are new police officers. We've been, over the last, handful of years, adding new officers. Those capital projects, which I mentioned, that are nearing completion or complete. Annual maintenance associated with our procure-to-pay system. One-time costs associated with the fire academy. One-time expenses associated with an update to our zoning ordinance. One-time expenses associated with energy initiatives, although we do have an allowance for future years for that as well. The downtown mobility initiative, and then one-time expenses associated with ADA facility assessments. There were about $200,000 allocated as part of the fiscal year 2020 budget, and another $200,000 recommended for fiscal year 2021 to complete those assessments. In terms of that COVID reserve, we've talked about that, so I won't belabor this point, but I think it's an important element to include within our budget due to really the unprecedented nature of this event that we're experiencing. Having some level of flexibility to respond will be really helpful. Whether it be revenue loss, if we don't hit our revenue targets because of this event or a second wave of that event, or for expenditure items, some of which I responded to when Councilmember Sanchez asked that question. $3.2 million included in fiscal year 2021. One note I'll make about this is that staff is evaluating opportunities to use some of those federal funds as pass-through grants for community needs, focusing on vulnerable community members in particular. So we're targeting having a discussion on that particular topic at next week's council meeting.
Madam Mayor.
Go ahead.
Thanks. Eric, just, I guess, to get this on the record, just so everyone understands, anytime we have a reserve like this or a contingency fund, the process to spend that reserve is both a discussion at the council member and then an interim budget change when the money is actually spent. Just in case anyone was wondering, this is not some slush fund that anybody can go and just use. This is a fund that's for a specific purpose, and to use it, you have to have detailed discussions and an official interim budget change. Am I correct on that?
You are correct, and thank you for that clarification, council member.
Thank you.
As we gear up for those department discussions in just a few moments, one of the elements that will be included is whether or not items have been built into what we're calling our baseline forecast. So over the course of the last several months, I've been gathering requests from departments, and some of those items have been built into the forecast, and those are the recommendations that you saw on previous slides. And some of those, some items are not necessarily included in our baseline forecast, but we're tracking them. And many of those would compete for that annual $800,000 that we've put aside for workload requests. That's a component that I've built in for every single year of the forecast. And, you know, we've done our best to project what our general fund budget would look like over the next 5 years. Going back to kind of that iterative nature, I anticipate that, you know, there would certainly be change to this as we get more data associated with this event. We can see some trend information about, you know, how are our revenues truly performing. But based on what we've assumed, you know, we would go into fiscal year 2021 with a balanced budget, that we would have some level of base flexibility in fiscal year 2022. As a percentage, it would be about, you know, 1.175% of our fiscal year 2021 budget. And then in the later years, a lower percentage. And the reason for that is because there are certain expenses that we've built into our baseline forecast that aren't applicable to fiscal year 20 or 21 or 22, but would come on in later years. An example being operating costs associated with the Northwest Fire Station. And you can see on the bottom some of the items that are included within kind of that baseline forecast. We have an assumption for normal revenue growth. You know, the starting assumption would be that 3% for property tax, but as we did this year, and, you know, have some discussion about what would be the appropriate number to include on a go-forward basis. We have assumed that there is a recovery from the recession beginning in fiscal year 2022. We have, you know, some level of normal expenditure growth built in every single year. Our fiscal year 2021 recommended changes, obviously we've carried those through the forecast period. I mentioned the Northwest Fire Station. In some of the outer years, there is an allotment for potential market adjustments for employees that would be based upon a study completed by HR, and it would be based on what the market dictated at that particular point in time. We have $800,000 for workload requests, continued staffing associated with the police department. You know, we've been adding 5 per year, and we would continue that for the next handful of years. New parks maintenance and operations costs as we look at the parks projects that are included in our capital plan, but you know, no new strategic initiatives beyond those that are outlined in some of our subsequent slides.
Yeah, Madam Mayor.
Go ahead.
Thanks. Eric, just quickly for historic purposes, I think only a few of us have been through this since the Great Recession. My memory is that we were going to hit a pretty rocky piece in the projected general fund position in 23 through 25, regardless of this. And this has, as it looks like, just exacerbated that. But in fact, I'm surprised actually that it's as good as it is, given our long-term projections for 23 through 25 based on coming out of the Great Recession. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but it looks to me like you guys have done some pretty good work here.
Thank you, council member. Appreciate that. Yeah, I think, you know, we definitely do have expenses built in, you know, in those outer years. one component of the forecast that we've shown over the last couple of years has been, we've built in a recession, but we didn't necessarily know when it was going to occur. Now, we're in the midst of it, and some of those recessionary impacts are front loaded when you look at the window of our forecast. So we're hoping that we see recovery in the outer years. But I think that also points to kind of the iterative nature we're going to have to approach this, is as we get more data, those projections in the outer years may change some. But I appreciate your comments, and certainly we have done our best. And some of that is, a result of some of the cost containment measures that have been built into this budget as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. This slide is a little busy, but really what I wanted to do was provide kind of an overview of the budget cycle, and notating that there are many different components of what goes into the budget on an annual basis, and highlight the fact that over the next year, I think that I'm going to be in front of you quite a bit. There's going to be lots of opportunities to talk about budget topics. So what I'll do is I'll just kind of go top to bottom at a very high level and outline what the next 12 months could probably look like from a budget standpoint. And I think that will also help with some of the sequencing questions that we've had, and we have a follow-up slide on that as well. And if you look at the top left, those green boxes, those really represent the development of the fiscal year 2021 budget. So, we're hoping to finalize the budget content here very shortly, so we can, begin preparing for the final budget workshop and our budget document, and gearing up for the public hearings and, approving the budget and so on and so forth. We also have, those town halls that were outlined in some documentation over the last week that would occur in the months of June and July. And you can see really if this would have been a retrospective slide, you would have seen fiscal year 2021 going back several months as well. It's a multi-year process to develop the budget. And you can see, on the salmon to the right of that, you can see budget development starting in January 2021 for the fiscal year 2022 budget. So we're really working on budget development a good chunk of the year. That pink bar below it represents kind of budget monitoring, and that's really an all-year exercise. And I think that point is especially important, as we're in this COVID event. I could foresee us coming to council with recommendations to adjust our revenue estimates, whether they be to bring them up or bring them down at any point over the next 12 months. We do bring quarterly reports, and when we bring those quarterly reports, we often bring recommendations to adjust the budget at that time as well. And I would say that, as we go through that would be a real opportunity to have, discussions with the council in terms of changing direction or little tweaks that we want to make, because we will be in front of you so frequently for that process. The next chunk below represents kind of buckets. So I think there's a couple of things.
Eric, when I was about to ask the chunk below, you mean like the light blue color?
The light blue color.
Okay.
There. Thanks. So there are, I think a couple of categories that we're working through. So the first being that $2 million reduction target, of which we have about $400,000 identified. Once we get through, the immediacy of building this budget, and we can, dedicate additional time to working that additional 1.6 million, we hope that we would bring forth recommendations, before the conclusion of this calendar year. And then once we have a better sense of that, we could start to consider departmental workload requests. The other piece being the compensation approach. We have built in a reduced growth rate for both our general and our contract employees. and we wouldn't need to make any compensation adjustments until, much later in the calendar year. So we would have an opportunity to assess where we were on the $1.6 million, where we were in terms of reaching some level of reduction or reduced growth, and then looking at the economy before any of those adjustments are implemented. In terms of property taxes, at this past legislative session, a committee was essentially approved to study property taxes, and we think that the budget office will be certainly involved in monitoring and supporting activities associated with the legislature's review of property taxes, and that will be probably span beyond what is shown on this slide. They talked about it being maybe even a 2 or 3 year exercise. The property assessment notices have started to go out, and community members should start seeing those soon. The budget certification, that really ties back to the fiscal year 2021 budget, but we would need to certify our property tax figures with the county in September. And then you would get into the annual process with, the tax assessment notices, discussing what the growth rate would be, so on and so forth. Around impact fees, you may recall that the last time we did a comprehensive update of our projects and our impact fee schedule, as well as our impact fee rates, was 5 years ago. So per state law, we need to amend our CIP every 5 years. We have a little bit more than a year to go on that, and we would anticipate numerous council discussions as we look to update that development impact fee plan over the course of the next year. And then just a couple of other notes, and these are really kind of ongoing notes. One being maturation of our priority-based budgeting view, and I'll get into that in just a couple of moments. And then we're going to continue to implement our budget system. But really, I think the major takeaway here is that there is going to be really a very active level of dialogue with the council around the budget over the course of the next year, and many opportunities to discuss where we might need to make tweaks or adjustments as we go forward. This slide kind of demonstrates some of the interdependencies that are included within this budget. So to the degree that we have improving financial conditions, whether it be COVID, the duration and impact of COVID, savings from that $2 million reduction target, or salary savings, those things working together will create increased financial capacity, which would allow for future compensation growth, future strategic initiatives, and departmental workload requests. And the inverse of that would be, to the degree that COVID-19, the duration and impact is worse than we have modeled, that savings from that $2 million reduction target don't come to fruition, or salary savings, there would be less financial flexibility and less capacity to address those items. That's kind of the overview that I had prepared. We do have our priority-based budgeting discussion, and then the departmental discussions. But before we go into priority-based budgeting, maybe we can pause, and if there's any follow-up questions to those materials, I'd be happy to try and answer.
Madam Mayor.
Go ahead.
I just want to thank Eric for answering a lot of the questions that I had last time we met. A lot of this stuff is much clearer, and I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'm going to suggest, if there aren't, maybe I jumped the gun. Any other comments?
Oh, this is Patrick. A couple of weeks ago at one of the budget meetings, I said I get pieces and I don't understand the big picture. I had a.
Hey, Councilman, could you talk a little bit more loudly?
How about
please?
this?
But much better.
I wanted to express that a couple of weeks ago at a council meeting, I sort of shared that I understood pieces of the budget, but not the whole thing. I had a meeting with Eric, and I know some of his presentation here was really tailored towards helping me get the big picture. This is exactly what I was hoping for, and it's so helpful. And I know he must have worked all weekend, and I'm so grateful for it. This is really, really helpful.
Thank you very much. I'm glad it helped.
So if we were all in person, we would have scheduled breaks into our agenda. I'm going to propose we all just like take a quick break and meet back here in 3 to 5 minutes, because otherwise we're all gonna, it's hard with the cameras going to otherwise take a break. So quick bio break, 5 minutes. We'll see you back at 9:40. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. That was a great presentation.
Thank you, Mayor.
It really was, and I'm really grateful that you sent the deck as well, because so many of the things that I don't understand are sitting right there in your slides. It's just awesome. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm glad it helped, and I appreciated your comments last time, because I think it, it wasn't unique to you in terms of needing some of that. So I appreciate it.
I promise you, I appreciate it more.
Just a warning, you guys, we are still streaming.
Oh, I don't want the public to know how grateful I am.
Just tossing it out there. Just tossing it out there.
Councilmember Sanchez, if you were here, will you please? Oh, great. All right, we're all back. Go ahead, Eric.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Before we get into the departmental presentations, I'll just touch briefly on priority-based budgeting. As we met over the course of the last week with council members, there was a desire for us to maybe talk a little bit more about priority-based budgeting, specifically around some maturation opportunities going forward. So I'll just, I really just have 3 slides to go over. So the first, just kind of a high-level overview of what priority-based budgeting is intended for and how it generally works. And I think probably the simplest way to think about it would be it's a programmatic view of city expenditures. So rather than just doing a departmental view, you know, we can look at individual programs that are offered. And in doing that view, what we aim to do is determine the alignment of that program with city goals and objectives to help us make informed recommendations and to help the city council make determinations as to how to allocate resources. So the way we've done that in the past is we've looked at our strategic framework, and we look at every single program and we determine, you know, whether or not, you know, or at what level that program supports each of the strategic framework areas: safety, our environment, our economy, so on and so forth. The other thing we look at are what we've called our basic program attributes. And we look at, you know, what is the cost recovery level for a program? You know, what percentage of the population is using it? Are we the only provider of a particular service, or are there competitors for that particular service? How are we servicing our vulnerable community members? Is it a service that we are mandated to provide? And have we experienced change in demand? So if we look at all of those things, you know, the goal is to evaluate each program and determine if there are opportunities to invest additional resources into it, to reduce the city's investment. And there's multiple ways to go about that. You know, we can look at revenues, we can look at, you know, new fees, fee increases, or increased level of reimbursement from other agencies. We can look at alternative service delivery, whether that be outsourced, and I should have included on the slide in-source, because we've seen recommendations associated with insourcing, partnerships with other agencies, some level of an investment, of a one-time investment that will realize expenditure savings on a go-forward basis, or even just a restructure to the program. And then the third would be looking at, you know, reducing or eliminating a particular service. This approach has, you know, many benefits. I think, you know, I'll just quickly touch on some of these. You know, obviously, you know, kind of aligning resource allocation decisions with citywide goals and objectives. Ensuring that, you know, we can maximize the delivery of our programs that have a community benefit. Assisting us with keeping up with growth and delivering new and enhanced services. There's a de-emphasization, I didn't say that right, of departmental boundaries. So rather than looking at it just at the department level, we're going, you know, a level lower and looking at service lines and determining how those service lines impact the community. You know, the intention of this program was for it to work hand in hand with our development of performance metrics. And when we were initially implementing this program, it was kind of a partner to the LiveStat program, and you know, just evaluating performance of our programs. Again, you know, having programmatic discussions rather than line item discussions, I think, you know, would be helpful to the council. And then, you know, from a transparency standpoint, we've been able to create a comprehensive listing of all of our program lines. We've included that in the budget document the last 3 years. We have costing information associated with all of those services, and we have an enhanced ability to review cost recovery levels. We do know that we have opportunities to further mature this program. You know, obviously we can continue to do program reviews and you know, looking at programs across the organization for opportunities to deliver more efficiently. You know, we can refine our evaluation criteria, and then, you know, the last time we did a citywide evaluation of all of our programs against those metrics was about 2 years ago. So the goal would be, you know, that we can update that biennially. We know that there are some infrastructure enhancements that we can do to further this program, incorporating performance metrics more, incorporating utilization and customer count data. That's something that we were working towards for this budget cycle. And due to COVID and some other circumstances, we didn't make as much progress on that as we had hoped, but that is definitely an area that we would like to see. We do want to use this as a tool, not only to identify cost savings, but also investment opportunities. As we go forward, we'd like priority-based budgeting to be fully integrated into our annual budget process and ensure that we're having, you know, just regular discussions with the City Council as potential programs are identified and as those evaluations advance throughout the process. That's all I had on priority-based budgeting. I'd be happy to stand for any questions that the council might have on that topic.
Madam Mayor.
Go ahead.
I don't have any questions, Eric, but I want to thank you for that presentation. I know that when I came onto council, I was so excited about priority-based budgeting, especially one of the last things you mentioned, which is the ability for us to use priority-based budgeting to make really solid investments in our future, knowing what the impact is of the investments that we're making. And so I appreciate your and Chloe's focus on maturing this program. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what we can do with it in the future. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
All right. So I'll now move to the general fund departmental review. And again, as we go through this, you know, we're hoping, you know, in the interest of time, to keep each discussion to, you know, 5 to 10 minutes. We're hoping that we can identify opportunities to come back to the council for further discussion, you know, and really kind of provide context to the budget and to some of the recommendations that are included. And then at the end, when we get to the last slide, you know, if there are specific topics, and we'll be keeping track of this as we go, that you'd like us to come back with, we can, you know, be keeping track of those. So we'll start with Jade, and he's going to talk about some of the citywide strategic priorities.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. And I'm going to keep my camera off. I'm having a little bit of internet speed issues. I swear I'm not on an island. So,
welcome, Jade. Thank you.
Thank you. This slide is not meant to be exhaustive of all the kind of citywide strategic priorities. More so, I just wanted to note that I will not be covering housing accessibility or transportation today, which obviously are Mayor and Council strategic priorities, as we've either covered them the last several weeks in work sessions, or we planned, as Eric said, on housing to be coming back to the council and going deeper on that. And then certainly climate innovation, as Eric mentioned, we've had an ongoing allocation within the general fund and several activities historically on that. I will be going into a little more detail on some new items within climate. So with that, the next slide.
Jade, will you remind me again of when we're doing the housing conversation? Is that June?
Eric, you have that probably.
9th?
Yeah, I believe it's June 9th.
Okay,
yeah,
thanks.
Yep. And specifically there, Mayor, I thought, you know, we'd go deeper into roughly that $6 million. I think several council members would like just understand kind of how that could play out as far as specific projects and approaches.
Yep.
So the next slide. So the council received a memo outlining the mayor's proposed strategic priorities. Those obviously were based upon resident input for those who served on the transition committees. And the mayor then reviewed those recommendations and prioritized those, added some additional items that were not included in some of those transition committee groups. So what I'll do is just walk through high level those that had a budget impact. You'll notice in the memo there were a lot of recommendations that did not have a financial fiscal year 21 budget impact. The first grouping are related to climate innovation, and these are citywide strategic investments, but you'll note the department that if the council approved the funds, where those funds would be housed. So I'll just kind of walk through these at a high level, and Steve is available on any of these if there's kind of more detailed questions. As the council's aware, we have set a energy target as a city, both city operations and as a community. And we've done a lot of good work in this area, but really in order to hit our target, we're gonna have to have a team member really eating and breathing this daily. And historically, we've been utilizing different team members' portion of their time. So the first would just be hiring a team member solely to focus on enabling us to achieve our energy goals, similar to what we've done on a team member on water as well. The next one is environmental justice and health equity. And the goal here would be some one-time funds to really get an understanding, an empirical understanding of both the goods and the areas for improvement throughout our community of where we stand from an environmental justice perspective, and as well as kind of a health equity perspective. The next is really, while climate change is a huge challenge, it's also, I think, the mayor's vision is it's also a huge opportunity for Boise to be a leader from a business perspective. So the idea is really to create an economic incubator focused around climate and really position Boise as a leader of how we could partner with the private sector and come up with really kind of innovative solutions to progress towards some of our climate goals. The next one is carbon neutral city operations. Again, this was approved last year as a target as an organization. These funds would really just continue to help us do the needed planning work to hit that goal of being carbon neutral. The next one is really, we know climate, affects the whole community, but we know we want to be cognizant of kind of those who are economically or socially challenged within our community. And so these funds would really be looking at where are ways that we can help Boiseans address some of our energy and water goals, but do that in a way that works for those households.
Madam Mayor.
Go ahead.
I had a question about that one. Would we be anticipating that we would be doing that ourselves, or would we be contracting with an organization that's already doing that work in the community?
Mayor, council member, great question. And if Steve wouldn't mind maybe just addressing that specifically.
Yes, Steve's on here.
Yeah, Mayor, council member. So our intent would be potentially to develop our own programs, but certainly teaming with Idaho Power and some other organizations in the community to try to leverage their connections within the vulnerable populations to get some of this energy efficiency program information to them directly. So it could be a combination of programs that we start that are unique to us, but also partnering with the Idaho Powers of the world to make sure that there's access to these programs and that folks are aware of them.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And I just want to point out that the Community Action Partnership already has a program that's similar to this, so that might be one of those potential partnerships to pursue.
I'll make a note of it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Madam Mayor, since we're stopped, I had a question on both this one and one prior. The economic incubator, my question on that is similar to Councilmember Wooding's. Are we proposing to start a new incubator? Are we proposing to partner with Trailhead or SBDC to utilize what's already in place in terms of infrastructures to support an incubator? Or do we know yet?
Steve, do you want to jump in there? He's been doing some initial work on the fleshing of this out.
Sure, Mayor and Councilmember. I think it's to be determined. We've had some conversations with some folks in the community, a couple of impact investors. We've looked at the concept of a trailhead as being the model for a climate economy incubator. Whether that would be attached to it or not, we're not sure yet. I think the thought that we had that it would go beyond just clean tech, and that would also include folks like social entrepreneurs that could help address some of the social issues associated with climate change. So to be determined. I think that's part of the funding that we're asking for, is to start to form up a scope of work and determine how that would move forward.
Okay, thank you. And then on the energy and water efficiency for vulnerable populations, I'm assuming this money is actually money to get out into the community for those vulnerable populations to be able to utilize to improve whatever position they're in terms of energy or water efficiency.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember, that's correct. Our intent would be to, based on demographics in Boise, to really focus in on parts of the community that are lower income, that really could benefit from energy efficiency upgrades. Now, whether it's us doing the energy efficiency upgrade or helping them, use the money to leverage some of the programs from Idaho Power, we're still going to figure that part out, but we definitely want to take the money directly to that population.
Thank you.
Great. The next one is on a solar project. This is really kind of scoping some potential new projects for the city. I think the council's aware under Idaho Power's new regulations, there's ability of larger entities such as the city to construct solar projects and then have that go back into Idaho Power's transmission as well. So this would really just be scoping which city facilities lend themselves to that opportunity the best. Transitioning from climate innovation, the next is really community engagement. I think one of the key priorities for the mayor is really pushing the city to up its game as it relates to engaging the broader residents and community. And I know that's been a goal of the council as well. The proposed funds would really look at some new tools, such as some texting platforms that would improve the city's constituency management and constituency kind of engagement, as well as a series of new trainings for staff to really look at new techniques and avenues to really up our game as it relates to engaging Boiseans. The next one, the council's aware, we started an initial partnership with Jesse Tree to look at eviction prevention. This would really just increase that commitment. We would go through a due diligence period, obviously, to understand whether that can, these funds would go to Jesse Tree, or there may be some other community partners that we could broaden, a larger partnership on eviction prevention.
Madam Mayor.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Jade, Mayor. Just on that one, I've already mentioned to the mayor that I think we should have a discussion with Boise City Ada County Housing. They do an awful lot of eviction prevention as well. And so as you scope that, just add that to add that to your thought process. And this is not a criticism, but we have these listed under departments, and community engagement and intergovernmental aren't departments. So I'm assuming that the mayor's office will manage these. I just want to make it clear to the public where these are going. Is that true?
Yeah.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
And Council President, I did pass on your suggestion that we include Boise City Ada County Housing Authority in the mix. Maureen is overseeing the development of this, and the most impactful, I've asked for recommendations on most impactful ways to use these funds. And so I expect she'll be back in front of us with a memo or presentation on further maturation of the program.
Great, thank you so much.
The last item on here is, I know that several council members also were interested in this, and the concept here would be some one-time funds to retain a consultant, kind of a formal planner who has a background in this, but it would be developing a master plan in which we can use our canals and other linear assets to be part of a larger urban pathway system. So this would really just first start to engage the public and develop a concept plan that would go through the city to use those assets, and then kind of inform a multi-year prioritization process to work with our canal company partners to potentially bring that to fruition.
Madam
Madam
Mayor.
Mayor?
Oh.
Yep, I've got Council Member Thompson, and then did I also hear Woodings?
Yes.
Great.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to come back to the energy efficiency components. I think I really liked the one specific to the vulnerable populations. I was wondering if we're going to continue to find creative ways to incentivize not just vulnerable populations, but everyone, regardless of earnings, to make the right improvements to their home, move from incentivizing, like programs. Idaho Power has programs, and find creative ways, whether it's information alone or creative methods to encourage folks to make those improvements within their home that are better for the environment and businesses alike. Thanks.
Steve, go ahead.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember, yes. As part of the Boise Energy Future project, we've identified, I think, of the 100% of the clean energy goal, 15% is going to come from energy efficiency. So we have a vested interest in making sure that the whole of the community is investing in energy efficiency programs. So one of the things we've started working with Idaho Power on is, as part of their energy efficiency advisory group, the EAG, we're trying to engage on ways that the city can better advertise Idaho Power programs across the community. It's not to suggest that Idaho Power is not capable, but we have access to a different kind of access points to citizens in ways that maybe they don't. So we're actively talking about that as part of the getting to that 15% of our energy efficiency goal moving forward.
Thanks.
Council President Pro Tem.
Thank you. I wanted to talk about the Eviction Prevention Fund a little bit. And I know that Maureen is totally on it and is probably going to come back to us with some really great recommendations. I think that there are some opportunities out in the community for partnerships that will have a really lasting impact on our citizens in the area of eviction prevention and kind of the short-term financial situations that folks sometimes find themselves in that drive them to predatory lending, and maybe diverting people from those situations that often make their financial outlook worse. And so I would encourage us to look at that. I know that there are cities around the world who actually have their own programs for helping folks with financial literacy and budgeting and that type of thing. And I think that those are the kinds of things that we can both give people a hand up in the immediate, but also really help them toward a more solid financial future.
Madam Mayor.
Thank you for that. Yes, Councilmember Sanchez.
I think that's a great idea, but having been one of those people, I got to tell you, budgeting and financial literacy can only go so far. And just considering the state that we live in with low wages and, just the current situation that we're living with right now, you can only slice an onion so thin. And, it really comes down to us providing those resources to folks. And I agree that, predatory lenders are terrible. And unfortunately, they are a last resort for a lot of folks. But, at the end of the day, what they need is resources. They need money. And so I think absolutely it would be great to provide any education we can, but we also have to recognize that at some point it's also the state where we live in, and that the resources just they're not there for people to take care of themselves at the level that they would like, and that there's a reason why an organization like Jesse Tree is so successful, is because they are meeting the need. They're meeting the need of people to be able to stay in their homes, and it's people from all walks of life. It's not just folks who don't have an education or a high-paying job. It's all kinds of folks, and at the end of the day, they just need a little bit of money to make it through. So I just want to make sure that we take that into consideration as well.
Madam Mayor, if I can respond, I wasn't suggesting that we weren't also providing assistance. It was more of a and both than an either or that I was proposing. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, we can go ahead. Is it Jade again?
Yeah, it is. Sorry, Mayor. Yep. So last slide that I'll just kind of cover, the next round of projects. As the council's aware, Mayor and Council have set a goal of reducing single occupancy trips within the city. And really at core of that is, in addition to the city's efforts of increasing contribution to VRT, the downtown transportation work that we've done, one of the key elements we've identified is really getting it right as far as behavior change. And to that end, what we've proposed is really focused of a multi-year effort on a culture campaign to really get people to think about changing that single occupancy car behavior. So that obviously would be led by community engagement, but we would obviously use some professional services dollars, but also really market and educate the community on the opportunity to really change that behavior. The next one is
Jade. I'm just going to jump in here and acknowledge that the council president's comments again refer to all these. These are offices separate from our office and not departments.
Thank you, Mayor. Yep.
Madam Mayor.
Sure, go ahead.
I just had a question on the ongoing funding on the culture campaign on alternative transportation. What's the projected ongoing funding need for that? Like, is it multi-year? Is it going to be indeterminate?
Jade, I feel like I read the memo. It was 5 years maybe, but I can't remember. Jade, or is there someone here that worked on that?
Mayor, Council, if there's another team member that has more detail, but what PDS and community engagement we had talked about tentatively, and again, there's a lot of details that need to be worked out, but anywhere from a 3 to 5 year, campaign in essence to really see if we could start to measure, is this education effort starting to move the needle as far as seeing increased transit ridership or alternative transportation ridership. But I think we've learned from other cities that we need to really commit to it for a multi-year effort to see if it could take hold.
Great, I appreciate that.
The next has been a long-standing topic from our employees of the city exploring alternative efforts as it relates to daycare. And I think really COVID has exacerbated that, that request from our employees. And so these funds would really scope out some potential improvements at a city facility to where we could explore the idea of on-site daycare. And I'm happy to provide a memo separate from HR that goes into the detail of that. We had a subgroup of employees that worked on this proposal really for the last 6 months on this item. The next area, as the council's aware, the city for the last several years has had a priority of really anytime we can when we're doing construction projects, whether that's ACHD construction, public works construction projects within the public rights of way, to look in ways that we can lay conduit to allow for private companies to expand fiber. We know that's a big issue from an economic development kind of competitiveness perspective. But equally, I think COVID has demonstrated to us that a social equity perspective within our community, the need of kind of everyone to have good access to fiber. So these would be one-time funds to just continue to expand the city's effort of laying that conduit kind of once the public right-of-way is opened up, so that it decreases longer-term costs.
Madam Mayor.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Jade, I appreciate that we've identified a project. I think as we've talked about this budget, we've begun to talk about what I'm going to call signal investments. And by that, I mean investments that signal to the community that there are certain things that we're going to do to support them in recovery. And I wonder if we should begin thinking about fiber as one of those investments. I know some of the other communities in the state have really gone big on fiber and used it as an investment that does provide equity, does provide better service, does provide equal service around their cities. And I know that we're in an era of tight budgets. It seems like actually some of the things on this list, while they're very important to me, if you look at them as signal investments, may not be the thing that will be the most important in that recovery. And so I'm not going to argue against any of these today, but I'm wondering if we want to think through, this is a lot of money, $1.5 million. I'm not quite sure that we've hit on those signal investments yet. And this is just one area of it. So I'm bringing it up here because of that.
Council President, Steve has had conversations with us about the potential of looking at how we build out a fiber project beyond this. And, you know, whether it be through public works or beyond, there's some initial conversations related to that, because it, you know, pre-COVID, it was a game changer for cities, and now even more so as people need to be able to connect and work remotely.
And Mayor,
or go to school and everything else.
Mayor and Council President, it's a very fair point. I think this budget request is somewhat predating COVID, as kind of the mayor was mentioning. It was some projects that were scoped for the last year and some. To your point, we do have a larger proposal that Erica's team has put together. I know we're all waiting to get more information on the next federal infrastructure bill, but one of the early indicators was the one piece that seemed like cities would be successful was on fiber. So we have put together kind of a much more aggressive proposal, and we certainly can come back to council and re-examine, do we want to have more city funds to that if, you know, that federal funds weren't successful. So it's a very fair point.
Thank you.
The next one is really, it's been several years since we've updated the overall city strategic framework, and obviously with a new mayor, several new council members, the concept here is for some professional services resources to facilitate an update to that strategic framework and development of the efforts. The next one builds on a previously approved budget allocation by the council. Councilmember Sanchez has been our council sponsor on a body of work this last 6 months to a year and some, and really appreciate that. This proposed funding, let me back up. There's a task order that's already been approved for kind of the next 3 to 6 months of work with a third-party professional resource. This would just be, we anticipate that we'll need more beyond that existing task order, probably for the next 2 to 3 years of kind of the journey that we've talked with Councilor Sanchez and the consultant to go on. And so this is really just providing that ongoing resources to support the contract with that provider. And then last, we know we've done, community engagement has done a lot of kind of in-house work on language translation, but we'd really like to up our game on that front. And so these funds would really help us do that, just really increase the amount of things that we're doing for language translation, as well as many of our existing city documents.
Madam Mayor.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Jade. Do we know what are the core documents? What and how soon would these translations begin?
You know, I'm going to defer. I don't know if Maria would be able to address that. And if not, maybe I'd just take that as a homework item to follow up if she's not able to.
Jade, let me get a little bit more information on that, Councilmember Sanchez, and I'll get back to you this week.
Okay. The reason I ask is, you know, I've been in this position before with other organizations who have the best of intentions to have improved communication with this segment of our population. And there were times where that was where we started, was with providing documents that were translated. But we didn't have the structure to support that. We didn't have enough bilingual staff. We didn't have staff that were trained on how to work with this community. And so what ended up happening is we translated documents that were not useful because they were not part of a bigger strategy. So that's the reason I'm asking is, are some documents that that there's a priority that they be translated at this time. So thanks for following up on that.
Mayor and Councilmember Sanchez, thank you. It's a really good point. And I did get a text from Chloe from Innovation and Performance Team. It sounds like both her and Sierra down in HR do have kind of a concept documents list. So we'll get that circulated to the council.
Thank you.
And then last but not least, the mayor as a council member and now as mayor had proposed the notion of creating a city human rights commission. This would be up to $50,000 if we needed to access some kind of national and best practice professional services resources to just help us scope the creation of such a commission.
Madam Mayor.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the Human Rights Commission. I have to admit that's something that it's been difficult for me to get excited about. And the reason being is because we haven't completed our assessment with the Dignitas agency, which is part of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Strategic Plan. I really would like to see us fulfill that experience and see if that's something that our community needs. Having worked for a Human Rights Commission myself for 5 years, what I have learned is in order for a Human Rights Commission to fulfill its mission, people have to be hurt. They have to perceive that they are harmed in some way to then turn to the commission. And ultimately, my goal as a member of this council is to avoid that from the beginning, and that should be what we strive for, is that we create a culture at the city of Boise where folks would not need to make use of a Human Rights Commission, either with the state of Idaho or with the city of Boise. So I would like to see us perhaps hold off on something like that and perhaps use some money like this to fulfill whatever recommendations that the training, that the assessment of our organization result in. So I just wanted to give that input.
I appreciate that, council member. I think it's really important that we look at both, that we look at internally and externally, and the scoping would help us to determine how best to create the commission and the focus of it. Some cities do have ones where it's designed for people to go who are hurt. Others, and when I envisioned this last year and proposed it, others actually use this commission just like the Arts and History Commission and others to help advise us on decision making. And the notion of this actually came from the accessibility community, some conversations I'd had with them, pointing out that there are things that we don't all necessarily think of when we're making decisions. So, but all of that would be part of the scoping when we get there. And I think it, could definitely wait until the initial assessment that's being done by Dignitas looking internally to the city is done.
Thank you, Mayor.
Madam Mayor?
Yeah.
Maybe I have a bit of a suggestion here as well. I'm glad to hear your explanation of what you envision this to be. And I guess before, and also I think it's a good idea to wait until we have that internal assessment. I would also appreciate, because I'm not real sure that I understand what this commission would do, having a discussion with the council, with policymakers about what is envisioned, what authorities we have, what authorities we don't have, what would we gain with this that we couldn't gain without it. Those kinds of questions that I'm not saying this is a bad idea or a good idea. I think it's probably a good idea, but I don't know enough about it, would like to have that deeper discussion about it before we go forward with any scoping, if that makes some sense.
Sure, and really that should inform any scoping that we did, was the initial conversations about what exists out there, what we think we might be value added, and then have that inform some more of the scoping that would be done.
Thank you.
Thank you for the feedback, and that concludes my item, and I think, hand it off to the next team member. Oh, I apologize. Sorry. These, I kind of walk through, there is a net proposed 3 FTEs, 2 mayor's office and our other innovation, performance, community engagement. And the first one that is really a new position within community engagement to really, again, up our game. The notion though is it would be self-funded within resources that were already in the mayor's office budget due to just kind of some repositioning. The items 2 and 3, the council had already approved via an interim budget change previously, so I won't go into those.
Madam Mayor. Thank you. The Keep Boise Moving position, as it was originally envisioned, was working within what small transportation group we have today. And while I appreciate having someone who's looking at the overall picture, I wonder if we need to have a discussion about whether or not that transportation group will have the internal resources they need to do the work that they felt they needed to get done. I think if we move this to the mayor's office, it may take some resources that they were counting on to take some of the load off existing staff so that they could actually get some work completed. So just an FYI, I think we probably need to have a discussion about how that's all going to work.
Mayor and Council President, that's a fair point, and we're due to come back to the council and talk through a little more detail on kind of the Keep Boise Moving plan. And so I think that'd be a natural thing of kind of what PDS would be focused on versus this position, and kind of are we aligned on the resource front?
Thanks.
Over to you, Terry.
Thanks, Jade. Good morning to all. I'll be quick. We have our FY 20 and 21 investments that have been approved. This includes the $30,000 for the Heyman House maintenance operation, utilities and such. The house will begin probably sometime this summer, and then all of the exterior landscaping we hope to be done by this fall.
Terry,
the $10,000 is for the what?
You're going in and out a bit. Sometimes we've found that if the connection's on and off, turning off your camera, as much as I'd love to see who's talking, but turning off your camera might make your voice more constant.
Okay, I can't figure out how to do that. I was trying because my computer keeps telling me I have a bad internet connection lately. I can't. Where do I turn off the camera?
Do you see down lower left? Does yours say mute and stop video?
Yes, I see stop video. So I hit the HD camera?
Or just hit stop video.
Okay, did that work?
No. Amanda, is it possible for you to control it from, there we go.
It worked.
Thanks. Go ahead, Terry. We can't see you.
I'm so sorry.
I can't hear you.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm new to Zoom, so trying it out here. So what I was saying is that for FY21, the investments that have been approved and included would be the $30,000 for the Irma Heyman House, which is a project that we are beginning this summer for renovation of that house and completion of the landscape. And that should be done by this fall. The M&O will be for next year to handle all of the monthly costs and some preliminary announcement about the house. The $10,000 is requested for James Castle trailer. We were in a big storage unit with Public Works for the last couple of years, and we lost that lease and had to find a separate place to put that trailer while we get it stabilized and renovated. The future investment opportunities that the question is it specific in the baseline forecast? These are all no, but I wanted to highlight them because I think they're important future investment opportunities. The Boise Center for Arts and History and the City Archives were formerly included in the library campus project. And since that's not going forward, I feel like to keep our eyes on the prize for these two things. They can be bundled together or they can be done separately. The City Archives, we've worked very hard to bring back to life, and we're in a storage situation where we again are on a month-to-month or year-to-year lease. And that concerns me because this includes rare city documents, artifacts, and our public art collection. The Boise Center is the idea that we would have a gallery and a place to engage the public daily on Boise history and Boise art and other kinds of community activities. The James Castle, and to get that site complete, we're working with an architect to get some phasing options and funding around that, or at least identify financial requests. And then our grant program, I think is an important program. We've been at about $150,000 for the last few years, and I think that it's been a tremendous asset to helping our cultural community, and particularly now coming out of COVID. I think that a lot of our orgs are really on the margin, and I'm concerned, and I think that this is an important source of funding to help our community. The significant issues in this 1 to 4 year out, the policy parameters around the Percent for Art program. The Percent program will be 20 years old in 2021. And with that, we're going to take a look at what that whole public art looks like and the investment, and work with our community to plan out that program for the next 5 to 10 years, including really taking a look at the percent. Some of the language is prescriptive. It's a little outdated, and there might be some new opportunities to make that a more flexible program. And then I put in here staffing requirements for the next 3 fiscal years. We have a number of part-time and term employees and a temp, and we've got enough work going on that I'd like to eventually be able to talk about some of these and what it looks like for staffing for the future. But that's all I have.
Mayor, Council, if I could, this is Jade. I just wanted to highlight on Terry's item 4 that while it isn't currently in the recommended budget, when we come back next week with some of these federal pass-through recommendations, we are also going to maybe bring things like would Mayor and Council be supportive of doing a 1 to 2 year increase of that grant program from a COVID economic development perspective. So that's still on the radar.
Madam Mayor.
Go ahead.
Hey Jade, thank you for bringing up that point on number 4 there. I think I've got a lot of concerns that sometimes, when things get tough, arts sometimes is one of the things that gets cut. And I think that actually right now is one of those times when if we are talking about equity and diversity and inclusion and all these other things, that art and history play such an important role there. So I'd love to make sure that if there is capacity, whether it's some of these pass-through funding grants or other opportunities, that we continue to make sure that we capture this moment and kind of use our arts and history funding to complement some of the other things that we're doing. So I appreciate you offering that clarity to part number 4 there.
Madam Mayor.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I'll echo that, and back to my signal investments. I think arts and history and anything that supports small business owners, of which most artists are, is something that we should also be looking at as a high priority. In addition, I'm hoping that when we have the library discussion on the 16th, we can reserve at least a little bit of time to talk about the Boise Center for Arts and History, which was going to be part of the library as well as the archives, And back to the signal investments, wondering if the money that's currently in the River Myrtle district in CCDC could be used to begin making some of those signal investments that might well serve the Center for Arts and History. I know there's still a parking garage that's potentially in the planning stages there. And I'd like to have a discussion about whether or not this center could be part of that garage if it's not going to be part of the library, so that we still get the cohesive program that we envisioned originally with paring down some of the expense perhaps on the library side. So.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
Thank you. Terry, I'm very happy to see that the Heyman House, that's going to be moving forward. As we all know, there's very few people of color acknowledged in our city, much less women of color. And so I'm very pleased to see that. And I echo Councilmember Halliburton and Council President Clegg in terms of really appreciating the work that's being done to support artists right now, especially at this time. I would like to see that we are making sure that those underrepresented groups, that we make sure that we're taking the opportunity to reach out to them so that they can make use of these funds that we have. I know that the funds are available, but it is quite a leap to be not just an artist, but then to take that leap to actually call yourself artist and then access funds. And I think there's some communities that they do need that extra invitation to participate at this level. And so whether that's our refugee community or our non-English speaking community, I like to see that we make sure that these folks know that these resources are there for them and that we want to experience their art as well. Thank you.
Yeah. Mayor and Council, I appreciate all those good comments. It's heartwarming actually to hear support for the department and for these kinds of programs that we do. And Councilmember Sanchez, we are working to just gotten approval to pursue a grant with the National Endowment for the Arts for enhancement to the grant program of $50,000 to specifically identify the communities you were talking about. So if that comes through, that should be available sometime next year. And then of course, in our regular outreach, we continue to do that and work with as many people in the community as we can.
Thank you, Terry.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Terry.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor.
Great. So Mayor, members of council, hi, this is Linda Lowry. I'll talk about DFA. So for FY20, we didn't have significant investments in the department, but for FY21, we're looking to continue some existing programs. We, as part of the end of year funding for FY19, we approved the implementation of a new peer-to-pay system. And as we're looking at vendors and we're entering into the phase one of this project, we're finding that a cloud-based vendor is probably our most likely choice, which will require additional ongoing base costs, as you've seen in several of the slides that Eric has presented. We're looking to also implement phase 2 Questica, which is our open book platform, hopefully for additional transparency on our financial data and financial information for the public. And we have a payment system in the clerk's office that has reached its end of useful life. It's not supported by the vendor anymore. We need to look to replace that system as well. And lastly, we have a couple limited duration positions that were approved for animal enforcement last year as a trial to increase our animal enforcement staffing. And due to when we hired those positions and the seasonality of those positions, it makes sense to go ahead and extend the duration to make sure that we have enough information to determine if that's something we want to continue doing or not.
Madam Mayor, can I ask a question there?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Linda. What are those? I thought all of the enforcement was done through Idaho Humane Society, so I was curious what that is.
Good question. So we contract out with Idaho Humane Society to do our animal control. This is more animal enforcement that the city does, which is enforcing leash laws, waste pickup, so on and so forth throughout our park system, trail system throughout the city. So those are the positions that the city manages.
I see. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Mayor, Councilmember Thompson, just a quick background. Originally, as we saw more and more complaints in the foothills and the parks, originally we increased IHS contract to have them do it. And after a year or so, they did not like to do that. They wanted to just stay in traditional animal control business. And I think, yeah, and so that became then back insourced within the city. And this is a priority-based budget project that we are looking at of, do we look at maybe further insourcing back from Idaho Humane Society, some of the other positions?
And one other follow-up, Madam Mayor, would this be part of the clerk's office? So they have 3 enforcement officers, so this would be a 4th, is that correct?
Correct. So currently we have 4 full-time animal enforcement officers. And so this is adding 2 limited duration positions, which we did add as part of the FY20 budget, and we just hired them a few months ago. So it's just extending the term of those 2 additional positions for a total of 6 positions.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So our future investment opportunities and these are things that we requested that have not been specifically added into the budget. We're hoping that we'll have an opportunity to review these, as Eric mentioned, at the end of the year when we allocate that additional bucket of funding. One of the positions that we were hoping to move forward with, we were ready to go before COVID hit. Unfortunately, we had to have our hiring pause, was the idea of a central travel coordinator. We've done a lot of work on this and determined that we think this position could actually pay for itself and achieve a lot of efficiencies and cost savings throughout the city in terms of how much we spend in travel related expenses. We have a current part-time position that's open, and we were going to make this request an additional part-time allocation to make this a full-time position to provide that service throughout the entire city. In addition, we have a limited duration position that we were hoping to make full-time. That's an AR specialist in one of our areas, and this is kind of related to just really workload demand. We decided because of the backlog of work in this particular area to go ahead and hire this position. We found that the need is ongoing, and that this is allowing us in that group to have a little bit of capacity if they have any vacancies or any staff that needs any time off. And really that's kind of where we're at in DFA and staffing in general right now. Is workload demands have increased to the point where we really are having a hard time finding capacity to absorb any type of vacancies or a time off at all in our group. So our request is for an additional 3 FTEs just to be able to support our day-to-day financial transaction load as well. And then again, as you've seen throughout this presentation, especially Eric's slide, the eye chart on all the things that happens on budget throughout the year. Eric and his team are extremely busy. We're hoping that we could look at additional support in the budget office as well, not just to help with workload, but also to be able to advance, continuing to implement Questica, our budget systems, continuing to optimize our processes, and as well as continue to help evolve our priority-based budgeting approach and have some more dedicated resources to be able to make more progress on that program. Longer term, I think, in coordination with IT, we'll be evaluating what our long-term ERP strategy is, our current ERP, the version that we're on Lawson. The vendor will no longer support that in the next couple of years. The upgrade to the next version is significant enough that I think it deserves a pause, and for us to determine, is Lawson really meeting our long-term strategic needs, or should we look at evaluating replacing Lawson? So that will be something that we'll be working on with IT over the next couple of years. That would be a significant investment either way, if we upgraded or if we replaced Lawson. In addition to that, we would like to perform a staffing study in DFA to understand long-term with some of the decisions we're going to make related to our ERP system, as well as where we're at and being able to optimize our financial processes if we're really optimally staffed in DFA or not for the long term. And again, as our organization grows and we become bigger, we think it's continue to be a top priority importance to achieve economies of scales and in finance and our day-to-day workload. And we see some opportunities for in the accounts payable and accounts receivable area if we continue to push forward on standardization and centralization, where we can achieve some economies of scales and some efficiencies, so we don't have to just continue increasing staff as we get bigger. So those are kind of focus areas for us in the near to long term as well. With that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Madam Mayor?
Yes, Councilmember Bajent, sorry.
Bajent, yeah. I don't have a question, I just have an observation. My guess and my gut is that supporting the budget office to meet the workload demands that it has, even though it may pencil out to be a slight FTE change or revenue neutral, it's the kind of thing that down the road ends up saving you huge amounts of money as that office becomes more efficient and finds ways to make the budget more efficient. And so I guess that line item there, in particular number 4 in the second set of bullets, is probably a real opportunity for a lot more efficiency and a lot more savings to the city in the long run than it might seem, even just looking at it.
Thank you, Councilmember Bajent, for that. I wholeheartedly agree with you. One of our goals in general in DFA has been to try to look at our processes and achieve economies of scale so that folks in the budget office, our finance folks, can spend their time on value-added activities, helping the city do an analysis to make better decisions, which hopefully will allow us to save money and make good decisions, good financial decisions for the future.
All right, thank you, Linda, and all of your team.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mayor and members of council. Just wanted to cover a few things here with fire. So the first thing is we want to talk a little bit about 20 and 21 investments. So in 2020, we were able to purchase a number of AEDs, or automated external defibrillators. These devices we were able to standardize across the county and integrate directly into with Ada County EMS. So it's been a good device purchase for us. In 20 and 21, we've also been able to add some additional recruits into our recruit academies. So we were approved in 2020 for 6 additional recruits, and in 2021 for 3 additional recruits. We're finishing up our current recruit academy right now. They should hit the line in July. And then we'll start an additional recruit academy just after the first of the year, and those 3 positions will be able to increase those numbers. As most of you have probably seen with some of our budget projections, we did have kind of a high year with retirements. So these additional funded positions will help us stem that tide, if you will, with those additional openings. Some additional FTE additions and reductions in 20 and 21. In fiscal year 2020, we were able to add or transfer an emergency management coordinator. This was currently a limited duration position, but we were able to make that a full-time permanent position. We were able to add a permit records technician. And this position really looks at all of our third-party fire protection system reports. It's important to note that that is a revenue neutral position. So we're able to do that through some billing, if you will, that's tied to those report review that we collect a portion of. Even in this current COVID situation that we're in, we're still seeing revenues that are still producing a revenue neutral position. So we're pretty happy about that. We were able to add 1 additional training captain, obviously with the addition of the training facility several years ago. That position has become very important to maintain our training and staffing levels there. The most recent reduction that we're planning for in 2021 is the reduction of one of our division chiefs of operations. So we did have a number of retirements and openings occur over the last few months here in fire. And we were able to take one of those positions and evaluate it with regards to one of our wildland division chief positions and consolidate some of those duties and take that that limited duration wildland position and create it into a full-time permanent position. So saved a little bit of money there. And I think Eric mentioned that earlier in some of our salary savings as well. So some of the future investment opportunities that we have coming up here is our Northwest Station. As most of you are aware, we're planning for that Northwest Station up on Gary Lane currently. We have identified that in the capital improvement plans for a build in 22. So the staffing would probably fall in that 22, 23 range as well. And then as well as that Northwest Station, the remodel of Fire Station 5. So and both those are in the capital improvement plans as shown. So those are some of our bigger future investment opportunities from a capital standpoint that we're seeing. As I mentioned earlier, some of our significant issues as we continue to move forward is we did have a large number of retirements, and we're still trending that we're anticipating retirement. So that's why we're trying to add those additional recruits to Academy to get us back up to an appropriate level of staffing. Where this also then leads down the road is as we add new recruits, then we also have to add new officers. So we have a number of off-cycle promotional exams that we have to deliver, and there is costs involved with those off-cycle exams. We have to bring in instructors or bring in evaluators, set them up, things like that. As we mentioned, the Northwest Station, that's certainly something that we're continuing to deal with and continuing to plan for as we move forward. As well as NACFR. So North Ada County Fire Rescue is one of our contract services that we contract with, and we're continuing to work with them. They're currently undergoing a analysis by an independent company just to look at their overall operations structure, how they operate, budgets, things like that. That'll feed back into our discussions with them. We currently did just extend, or we're in the process of extending their contract a year, and then we'll roll into that a little bit more. Operational response deployment model is just something that we're continuing to work on. Obviously, how we deploy resources, where we deploy resources, their placements, things like that, that we really need to continue to monitor. And then obviously, as many of you are aware, we're continuing to have discussions with our union with regards to some of the FRF funding that is coming up here, where we have some meet and confer obligations that we'll see where that comes as far as additional staffing potential. So fire service contracts, cost models, and longevity. As I mentioned, we do contract with 3 special districts. Certainly as we continue to grow as a city and add area and annexations and things like that, we really do have to continue to look at those staffing model or those contract cost models and just make sure they make sense for long term. So that's certainly something that we're continuing to look at, especially as we grow into Whitney's area and we take away some of their revenues. We want to make sure that those districts, both NACFR and Whitney, remain solvent and can continue to fund their contract obligations with us. The final significant investment that we're really starting to deal with right now is SCBAs. So SCBAs are self-contained breathing apparatus. So those are those air tanks that we wear on our backs when we go into hazardous environments. Those have reached or starting to reach their end of their useful life, and we really need to start planning for replacement for them. We've been planning for a while, and we've been seeking federal grant funding to replace a portion of those, but they're about $2 million to replace our entire staffing or our entire equipment pool, if you will, of those devices. So really looking at grant opportunities, but if we are unable to obtain those grant opportunities to match a portion of it, we'll likely have to fund that additional outlay for capital or for major equipment costs. So with that, I would stand for any questions.
Madam Mayor?
Yes, Councilman Bajan.
Romeo, I have a 2-part question, and I'm not even quite sure how to describe it, but here's my understanding of what happened last year. That there were a number of retirements that weren't anticipated. A lot of people got to the end of the career and left, and that caused a shortage that then caused us to up the number of recruits in the academy, and maybe even have a second recruit academy that we weren't planning. I'm not quite sure about that. My 2-part question is, well, and then moving forward, we got into COVID-19 and it became logistically difficult to conduct some of the training. We had some people drop out of the academy, which shrank some of the classes. And so the first part of my question is, do you feel comfortable with where we are and the number of recruits coming online and meeting staffing needs? And then the second part of my question is whether you have any sense of the potential effect of the poor performance in the market this year on people's decision to retire. I can imagine a situation where we had a whole bunch of people retire last year. People decide this year, I'm going to hold off a little bit because the markets aren't performing as well and I'm just not in the retirement position that I thought I would be. And so all of that bundled up together, the real question is, do you feel comfortable with the number of recruits coming in, the anticipated retirements, previous retirements, and a general staffing level going into the next 2 years or so?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Councilmember Bajan. You know, fiscal year 19 was an abnormally high year for us with number of retirements. We had 21. We were projecting 12 initially, based upon our trends, if you will. We've usually been pretty good, but fiscal year 19 certainly threw us for a loop. That's one of the significant reasons why we did offset and add this academy here that we're running right now, is we've moved it up a cycle. Traditionally, we graduated recruits in December, the last several cycles. So by getting this 14 recruits that we have in right now off the line or onto the line in July, it certainly will help. The other component that really we're looking forward to is that next academy start after the start of the first of the year, where we do have additional funding to hire extra recruits in there as well over our base recruits. So every year we're provided a base amount of funding for Recruit Academy. So these are extra recruits. So it's not just like we're adding 3 or we have 3 recruits. It's over a base amount. So that should bring us up to about 15 recruits after the first of the year. You know, it really just depends upon how our retirements project or continue to trend forward. If the situation that you mentioned starts to occur where there is some uncertainties and things like that, and we hang on to extra people, certainly that would be a benefit in terms of immediate staffing needs. I feel like we're in pretty good shape. I think the real unknowns, though, is some of that Northwest Station when we start to add additional staffing for that. And we start to add some additional staffing if there's alternative service delivery models or outcomes and things like that that come into play. The good thing is that really what we've talked about, at least with finance up until this point, is as we continue to move forward through the summer, I think we'll have a better grasp on our additional retirements. And then if needed, then we can come back and look at, is 3 enough? Is 3 folks enough in 21? Right now, I think our budget numbers and our projections are showing that should get us through that next cycle, assuming we don't add some additional staffing or something like that. So I think that answered your question.
It did, yeah, thanks. Concern in the back of my mind that we were trying to play catch up this year due to the large number of retirements last year, and then COVID happened and everything was up in the air. And I just have this lurking concern that somehow we were going to get whacked on the fire staffing in some way, not right away, but like in a year or 2. And I don't envy your situation at all, trying to anticipate when people are going to leave and trying to anticipate how many people are going to make it through the academy, and then trying to sit in a meeting like this and say, well, here are the actual numbers. So the context you gave is really helpful. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, Councilmember Bajan, I appreciate that as well. And you know, the COVID, our training staff has done a tremendous job with the COVID. We went remote for a little while and we're able to continue delivering the training. And our recruits will still hit the line exactly as we anticipated. So that's a kudos to them to be able to maintain this where we had to go remote for a while, still deliver that training and then get them back into the classroom and drill ground and stuff like that when it was safe to do so. But we're still going to maintain that July graduation date. So really this academy did help quite a bit with an off cycle by moving it up and then by having that next academy after the first of the year. So
that's fantastic. Thank you so much.
Madam Mayor.
Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Romeo, 2 quick questions. One, I don't see another station in the significant issues 1 to 4 years. I'm assuming that means if we get Station 9 and or the Northwest Station and Station 5 completed, that we've taken care of existing deficiencies in services and in stations.
Yeah,
Am I correct in that assumption?
Yeah, Councilmember Clegg. That is our current plan or current purview. Those two stations are the ones that we need to get solved in that next 1 to 4 timeframe. Realistically, we'll start looking south after that with the number of growth down in that Syringa Valley area, that kind of area. We are bringing as part of our comp plan amendment later this summer, kind of a revised staffing or a revised master siting plan, which will address some of that south stuff. But right now, yes, that northwest is certainly one of our critical areas that we need to get a station built and staffed, and then followed that with the remodel rebuild of Station 5. So those are our two critical things over the next couple of years.
Thank you. And that little follow up on that, I've wondered for a while. At first, we talked to Syringa about possibly doing a CID to help fund that station. That is not going to happen. And just want to put on the table that at least at one point, ACHD was examining extraordinary impact fees. I don't know if we have the ability to do that, or if Syringa Valley in that area would meet the requirements for that. But it does seem like we need to begin looking at something maybe a little different model for doing that. And then my last is mostly a comment. At some point, I would appreciate a briefing on the scuba gear, the air tanks, and what our long-term strategy is, so that we don't end up in this position again where we have a big bunch that are all going bad together, so that we don't. Can we spread it out? I don't know what our long-term strategy is on this. So just at some point, probably after budget, I'd love to have a briefing on that.
Mayor, Councilmember Clegg, thank you. Yeah, absolutely, we can do that.
All right, so I'm going to propose we, at the suggestion of a council member, we take a quick break. And I realized I lost track of time. We went over our time between breaks. So let's say 5 minutes max. When you come back, will you turn on your camera so that I know you're back, and we'll start again? And from a timing perspective, I think we're supposed to go into executive session at 11:30. If we don't get through all of these, we'll look at pushing them to work session next week, I believe, but I'm going to ask staff to reach out with some recommendations while we're in the break via Teams. All right, thanks. We'll be back at 11:04. All right, I believe I'd seen that everyone is back. And just a scheduling logistics update, we need 30 minutes for executive session, so we have until noon that we can go through budget stuff, and that should give us more than enough time, but noon hard stop and then executive session otherwise. Kelsey, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Mayor, council members. Just to give you a quick recap on HR, I want to start by thanking you for the FY20 investments that you made for the city, the ADA transition plan and improvements. This allows us to work on a self-evaluation with a third party. Unfortunately, because of COVID, they haven't been able to travel here to start this. So this likely will get rolled into FY21. That's our citizen-centric project. And then we have two that are employee-centric. The first one is Connect Boise, which is really the blow up of our performance management system, where we engage, grow, and recognize our employees, and just continuing to make that a priority. And the third one was replacing some of our antiquated physical security systems. So think about the hard-coded panic buttons and moving into more of an electronic panic button on a phone, which then also helps with text messages that we use to send out citywide. So again, thank you for those investments. Moving on to looking at some of our future investments for FY21, HR would like to conduct a staffing study. And as part of that, we've started to identify some of our workload capacity issues that we have. One was a limited duration position that was approved about 3 years ago, and it was renewed again. And this one is really looking at our employee experience. So from when we say hi to an employee to when we say goodbye, and making sure that we're providing the customer service that we need to. The second one is really asking for a limited duration position for 2 years to pilot a customer service approach. Security and safety has been one of our #1 concerns that we hear in our employee listening tour from employees. And over the last 1.5 years, we've tried to make incremental on increasing that. One of those pieces is looking at our evening events and employees who don't work the standard 8 to 5 shift, making sure that they feel that they're supported during that time. So we'd like to pilot that with the limited duration position. The third one is an FTE request of an employee relations specialist. So when we implemented Connect Boise, part of this was building the relationship with a supervisor and employee, but also addressing concerns early on. This has increased the demand on mediations between employees and supervisors and their teams, which has led to a capacity issue in HR. The second piece is a timekeeping and attendance solution. So right now in the city, we have 3 different timekeeping solutions, one in police, fire, and the general employee population. We're 7 versions behind on our general employee timekeeping solution, and we're about 70% funded. And so for FY21, we're looking at some additional funds to help us identify a solution that would create some efficiencies within the city. The significant issues that we have coming up, again, this is in partnership with DFA and IT, but we have multiple stitched together tools that we use in HR. And so it's looking at the ERP lens and looking to see what makes the most sense from an efficiency gain standpoint. Again, I mentioned earlier the continued ADA transition planning and those improvements. We weren't able to get the self-evaluation conducted within the last 2 months. Hopefully we can start that for FY20, but likely it'll be pushed to FY21. And then an upgrade of our physical access system. So this is the badge device readers and our gates. Those are coming to their life end, and it's replacing those. Again, that's a one-time request. So that's the human resource update. I want to thank you for the investments you made, and then open it up for any questions that you might have.
Madam Mayor.
Go ahead.
Kelsey, I'll go ahead and kick it off. My question is related to the ADA transition plan and improvements. I'm wondering, is HR then working with Public Works to implement those recommendations? How is that partnership working to deploy that?
Great question, Councilmember Woodings. So essentially with the self-evaluation, we would be working with every department to evaluate their programs, their services, and the infrastructure. That also includes parking. So when our consultants come in, they would be looking at those pieces and then identifying what improvements need to be made on a departmental basis with each department.
Great, thank you. And then would that knowledge then go into informing our capital improvement plan, or what would be the next phase of that?
Yep, great question. So essentially, we have been asking for a base budget for the next 5 years to make the largest and the high priority items, but the items that are based on each department would have to be calculated and put into the budget year after year once we identify what those items are.
Wonderful, thank you. I appreciate it.
Madam Mayor.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So first of all, a little bit of a follow-up on that. Will we also be looking at things that we enforce in terms of ADA? I'm thinking specifically of the fencing for sidewalk cafes, especially at corners where sometimes with sloping and so forth, you don't have as much room as some of those cafes take and still keep a level surface, for instance.
Great question, Councilmember Clegg. So that is included in the study. When they come to evaluate, they'll look at not just what we own internally, but then also what we are also providing guidance on externally. So that will be part of the study.
That one too. Okay. And then second, if I could, and I'm talking about this here because you're HR, and it seems like at some point, again, probably post-budget, we need an update of where we are as a city in terms of staffing, both on a per capita basis. Have we kept up with growth over time, or should we be keeping up with growth? Is there at some point at which a city needs to make some investments in staffing because you reach a size that you need to do some things that you haven't had to do before, and so your staffing needs actually increase versus finding efficiencies where you could have fewer staff and serve more people? I don't know the answers to all those, but it seems like as we answer these questions about new staffing requirements, that we probably ought to have some kind of a background based on that kind of an analysis.
Great, we'll work on that. Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Just to piggyback on Council President Clegg, I'm thinking in terms of the strategic plan that we are going to be working on with the Dignitas agency. I imagine that a lot of the recommendations are going to be involving HR, whether it's recruiting efforts to make sure that staff that come on board come from diverse backgrounds and have those connections to those communities. And also in referencing to the mayor's proposal of us having funding to do those translations of those important documents. I think it's important that we have staff who can then back up those resources. So I'm wondering if we want to anticipate that as well, that we might be needing to put some extra effort in doing those recruitments for that more diverse workforce that we're hoping to invite to join the city of Boise. So I just wanted to bring that up as well.
Great point. Thank you, Councilmember Sanchez.
All right, Kelsey, thank you to you and your team for all that you've been doing to support all of our staff the last couple months in particular. See you soon.
Bye.
All right, Erica, welcome.
Yes, good morning, Mayor and members of the council. I too wanted to just start out with a thanks and a bit of an appreciation for the support that you have provided in my first year, coming up on year and a half with the city. We have continued in fiscal year 20 to make some great investments that were really needed, and we'll continue to do that with your support. So first of all, I just wanted to cover briefly some of the things we've been doing on our cybersecurity posture, because that is an area that's going to continue to require our investment. One of the positions that you did approve for us last year was an additional cybersecurity analyst, and we have finally found a terrific person that's going to join us actually this next month. So we're very much looking forward to having that added resource to help us. In addition to that, we did implement this year a new cyber awareness training program and have been working to really beef that up internally, and to help us avoid some of the standard things that can happen out there, because our number one security threat, unfortunately, is actually ourselves. So continuing to invest in that training and have that in the forefront of our staff's minds is an important investment. So that has been completed, and we'll continue to monitor that. In addition, we are getting back to a routine schedule for our penetration testing, which is another really important initiative that we must continue to do, that the city had sort of backed away from a little bit, but we're going to continue to invest in that and make sure that that's part of our standard protocol every other year. In addition, the last item here that I thought was important to share with you is that we do have funds and are planning to implement multi-factor authentication. Most of you are familiar with this. You use it if you log into your bank account on your phone, or that kind of technology where you get a code that you have to then enter. We'll be using that on a number of our critical systems as that added security layer, and that's scheduled to start this year. So in addition, we've talked a little bit about these two PBB initiatives already, priority-based budgeting initiatives, but our hardware asset management plan, we are currently putting that into action to work to really standardize our devices across the city and to move to even more cost-effective devices with that anticipated savings of at least $55,000 a year. Also, we recently, for our software asset management project and implementation, we've done a lot of analysis in the last year, really understanding and documenting all of the software assets across the city. We have over 400 applications in our environment, which, as you can imagine, that's a lot of software, a lot of capabilities and tools. So with the addition of the resource that we have brought on recently to help support this area, we'll be looking at how do we rationalize that portfolio of applications, and how do we even work in tight partnership with our colleagues in both procurement and in legal to have a better process for how do we procure software, how do we negotiate better pricing in terms and conditions going forward. So lots more to come out of that initiative, but it starts by really bringing some of that expert skill set into our mix. I also wanted to just kind of make a note. Many of you know we went through a pretty significant effort last summer to really look at our overall organizational design in IT, and our staffing levels and our skill sets were analyzed, et cetera. And one of the things that I think is important to remember is today, our budget for IT is largely really around maintaining the current state, doing equipment refreshes, and just keeping the lights on, as I call it, with the systems and tools that we have in place. We did add 5 positions in F20 that were all part of our strategic plan. And then and 2 of those were at mid-year. In addition, this next year, we are seeking 3 additional really high priority positions that will help us to implement some of the more specialized skill sets that we really need at the city. In addition, there are 3 contractor conversions in the plan. We as a city have been employing a number of contractors on a long time basis, and it's actually far more cost effective and a better use of our taxpayer dollars to make those full-time employees. It actually gives us a savings of nearly $250,000 a year to make those contractors full-time staff. So those are kind of the big investments. And if you'll jump to the next slide for me, Eric, just to briefly touch on future investment opportunities. Obviously, I've mentioned our organizational redesign. As we sit right now today, our IT department is still 23% below the benchmark that we established last year. against a handful of other like cities. So we're making improvements, but we are continuing to need to add some of those specialized skill sets. Also, we are at a time where we need to upgrade or go through the process to redo our Microsoft Enterprise Agreement. And that's one of the largest contracts that we have as a city for the tools that we use. But this year will be a little bit different in this next fiscal year, because we are also looking at having to migrate from their commercial tenant to their government tenant, which we can tell you more about as that project evolves. But there is some capital that's been set aside to do that body of work. In addition, we know that we need to be focusing on our disaster recovery capabilities and continuing to invest on that front. And then last, but certainly not least, as far as future investment opportunities, is to really start thinking about how technology is a catalyst for so much of the innovation that the departments and my colleagues are wanting to do, and how can we as an IT department be resourced and be funded to support trying and testing and innovating things across the city. I think that's an important position for us to consider as we move forward. As far as significant issues, these items have mostly been touched on, but obviously we're going to be working in tight partnership with both HR and DFA on this more strategic systems needs that they have. We will always be needing to address and discuss kind of that ever increasing balance between the technology needs and the limited resources that we have available. I think every organization is always doing that, that dance and trying to balance that. So that's something I'm sure that we'll need to continue to address over the next few years. And then lastly, there is really about just modernizing our technology throughout the city and ensuring that we're always thinking ahead, and we're thinking about where we can save money and drive efficiency through the use of technology, and ensuring that we're not getting in a position as a city that we're not supporting modern business process and practice, because we know we want to continue to be able to provide the best possible solutions and services across the city. So that's something I want to make sure we continue to address in the coming years. So with that, I'll stand for any additional questions.
Madam
Mayor. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, okay, thanks. I'll go first. I'll be quick. So first, Erica, as you guys look at the hardware assets and kind of centralizing that in light of COVID especially, are you looking at also maybe changing strategies and going toward more laptops with docking stations so that people can both work remotely and at the city efficiently?
Yes, thank you for the question, Councilmember Clegg. We are evaluating our options. Part of, I think, what will be in the discussion at next week's meeting is whether or not we can actually get some of the federal reimbursement dollars to expedite making the city even further mobile enabled. That would be one of my goals, is that if we can obtain some of that funding, that we can expedite the addition of laptops and other supporting technology in our conference rooms. So that is on the radar for that. If we're not able to get that funding, then we're going to have to be pretty strategic about how do we try to drive to more laptops without getting to the point that we just can't afford that investment. But that is part of the strategy.
Thank you. And then my second question, sort of a comment to begin with. Any of us who went through the ERP change to begin with are sort of blanching at the idea that we might have to do another one. But having said that, just wanted to offer to you that I've been in contact with a couple of people at the National League of Cities, and this looks like it's an emerging issue all over the country for cities, that the ERP software currently on the market maybe isn't really well suited to city needs, or especially cities, but maybe government in general. And maybe there's a joint strategy we can think about with some of our peers on how to really find the system that will serve us well and will work for the long term, so we don't have to go through this cycle every decade.
Yes, agreed. And thank you. I would welcome that input, and also know that I am in touch with numerous other CIOs from around the country and municipal environments, and learning what they're doing, what's working, what's not working. because the vendor choices in this space are narrow. But those systems are becoming increasingly flexible and designed to be more modular in nature, which I think can work to our benefit.
Thank you.
You bet.
And what was it, Council President Pro Tem?
Yes,
Great.
thank you, Madam Mayor. Hi, Erica.
Hello.
I first wanted to compliment your team on the very public and very horrible citywide website crash a couple of weeks ago. I know that you guys were working around the clock for days to remedy that. And that kind of leads to my question. I'm sure you've done a postmortem on that now and you kind of know what happened. Does this plan that you presented to us, is that prepared to make some improvements to our system to prevent issues like that from happening again? Has that been implemented yet, or will that be implemented in the future?
Yes, thank you for asking that question, Councilmember Woodings. Absolutely, we've done a full postmortem and debrief and have laid out a number of items that need to be addressed. Some of it for us is simply policies and procedures and putting checks and balances in place. But that third item on this particular sheet around increasing our disaster recovery capabilities is where this becomes really important, because things will break, things will happen. That's part of being in the world of technology. However, our ability to recover and recover in a speedy fashion is really where we need to continue to make the investment. Having the proper failovers in place and having the proper recovery capabilities is where we do need to spend some additional time and resources. So that is part of the plan that we're laying out now. I wish there was a magic wand and we could do it all very quickly. But we do have key items in our plan for the next 18 months that should address the majority of those items.
Wonderful, thank you. I appreciate your response, and I look forward to helping in any way that we can to keep all of our systems up and running and to help your team.
Thank you.
All right, Erica, thank you so much for all that you and your team have done to keep us working the last couple months in particular, and look forward to working through many of these challenges and opportunities moving forward.
Thank you very much.
Really appreciate it. Have a good day.
Thanks.
Good morning, everyone.
Welcome, Jamie.
Oh. Greetings from my kitchen yet again. I will be rather quick here. First of all, the investment that you put into legal last year with the approval of an additional full-time employee as a criminal prosecutor has been really helpful in not only serving the city, but serving the community as well in the court system. We did originally hold off on filling that position to determine if it was still necessary, given some of the changes in contracts between Eagle and Garden City. But after doing an assessment and balancing that, the change in contract responsibilities with the additional court responsibilities, with the expansion of a new magistrate and the expansion of specialty courts, we did, in fact, determine it was appropriate to fill that position and have filled it at this time. With respect to the future investment opportunities for legal, we do have several vacant positions at this time. We do have 2 municipal vacancies and 1 criminal vacancy at the attorney level. As we move forward to fill those positions, we've taken some significant time into determining what would be appropriate for as an opportunity to better serve the city, and how those positions could be used or repurposed in a way that would streamline services from legal. So that's a look at our brief future investment opportunities. With respect to significant issues that are on the horizon facing legal as we look forward, the most significant one would probably be the criminal case management system. We do use Justware and have used it for some time, and it is sunsetting in the near future. However, we're also looking at this as an opportunity to build a civil case management system for the municipal side. We currently do not have one, and so we've been test driving a lot of different systems that might have capabilities to serve all of the divisions of legal and case management moving forward. So those are that civil management system, and then the criminal management system. Again, there's an opportunity for us to find a system for one cost that would serve multiple purposes. And finally, for additional potential issues in the future, we are having, at least at this point, our criminal prosecutors are members of the Idaho Prosecuting Attorneys Association. It is a helpful organization that actually has municipal and public safety components as well. It's an opportunity for continued legal education and alignment and training and development of trending issues in not only the prosecution realm, but in municipal realms as well. And with that, I'll be happy to stand for any questions.
Well, Jamie, thank you so much for joining us today and for all you've been doing. We will be back in touch.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Take care. All right. Looks like Christine has joined us now for library.
Good morning, Mayor, members of the council. Thank you. I will try to keep the library portion pretty brief this morning, since we do have a joint library trustees and council meeting to go in more depth on this in the near horizon. But for FY20 and 21, there has been some discussion already, but I would note that there is money set aside for major repairs and maintenance to the main library, or our downtown branch, as we're starting to think about it. And I would note that that does include addressing some ADA issues, as well as universal single-user restroom upgrades. In terms of future investment opportunities, there are several things that we are looking at. One of them is an update of the library system master plan. So the library system master plan is 20 years old and has had only modest updates done to it. And so as a new director is projected to be onboarded later this year, it's probably a really good time to go and evaluate what the city of Boise needs in the next 10 to 20 years from its library system. And so that is an item that we will be starting to investigate and bring forward a plan for that. The second item for future investment opportunity is upgrading our capabilities and implementing an automated book sorter. This has become more of a need in our COVID-19 times, but really is also a service level catch up. At the downtown branch alone, we process over 100,000 individual materials per month. And currently this is completely done manually. Although we did invest in an RFID tagging system for all of our materials. And so with the addition of some equipment, we could really decrease the amount of manual labor and touches involved. The third thing on our list is, again, somewhat COVID related, but work that was initiated before all of this, was looking at an enhanced user experience review of our virtual and digital services. So looking at bringing the library website in line with the broader city website design and usability. And then also looking at other software systems that may need to be implemented or upgraded now that there is more of a focus on virtual and digital services. And finally, the last item, the Friends of Boise Public Library have significant warehouse space, which will need to be vacated later this fall due to a development. And so we are looking at opportunities of a one-time investment where we could help the Friends consolidate and actually move likely out of our downtown branch into another place that would better accommodate their long-term needs. A side benefit of that would be it would free up a significant footprint of space on the 4th floor. And in the 1 to 4 year look ahead in terms of significant issues, we've already started to talk about, and we'll loop back and talk about more on June 16th, just investments in the facilities across the whole library system. And again, investing in a master plan for this, I think will really help us make good decisions about what investments should be made in which of our 5 locations. And as we kind of get into phase 4 and see kind of, you know, where we sit with some of these COVID adjustments, there may be additional operational or facility retrofits that are needed for the long term. But I feel like we're just beginning to kind of evaluate and understand those. So there may be more to come on that in a 1 to 4 year window. And happy to take any questions on any of that.
Well, Christine, thank you. And before you go, I'm going to point out that you're back in your library role, which I know you're very excited to be in, but truly appreciate all you did to coordinate, bring different community partners together and coordinate our community support in the early days and until just recently, actually, related to COVID and the needs of the community. Really, you did a great job doing that. I enjoyed seeing you in action, and it's so good to have you back at the library, where I know many of your people are excited to have you back too.
Thank you so much, Mayor.
All righty, Doug, I don't see you yet, but I imagine it's Doug joining us for Parks.
Yes, I am here, Mayor.
There you are.
A little slow this morning. Thank you, Madam Mayor, council members. And on behalf of EMT, thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak to some of our key issues moving forward in our departments. So one of the first items that we have on our list is something that council did approve back in March, which is a conversion of some temp wages into some permanent full-time employees. Just with the nature of everything that's occurring right now, we have put this on hold at this point in time, but we certainly want to have an opportunity to have some discussions at some point, maybe later in the fiscal year, to see if this might be able to be something that could move forward. And if council recollects that when we did this presentation back in March, it wasn't adding any additional funding to the department. It was just taking what we have in some of our temp wages and looking at the possibility of creating a more efficient workforce. And also retention was really the biggest concern that we have in replacing a lot of seasonal and temporary employees, with the fact that we can make them full-time with benefits, and there's an opportunity to increase that retention piece with them. So big shout out to our HR folks that helped us, and also to finance with Mike Schreck, who helped us run all the numbers and getting that conversion put together. A couple of the other items that we already have approved and included this year and next year, we have some trailhead construction opportunities, and that is the Hawkins, Cartwright, and of course Hillside to Hollow, and also in process the Warm Springs Mesa Reserve trailhead as well. The Zoo Master Plan is our next item, and that was funded through the Friends of Zoo Boise, and it was just refreshing the current plan that we have in place at the zoo. It was pretty evident, and I'll repeat this again in another slide here, but it's pretty evident when we opened the Gorongosa exhibit that the rest of our zoo is just a little bit tired. And so so we're looking at doing a master plan that has been completed, and looking at how we're going to upgrade some of those facilities moving forward and get them really into the 21st century. And then we just have a number of miscellaneous park amenities, Mayor and Council, that we have slated to be constructed and added to some different park locations. A lot of those are playgrounds. I believe we have 4 or 5 different playgrounds that we're proposing for this year. So that's included in that park amenity piece as well. As far as the future investment opportunities, one of the things we do want to do at the zoo, this came out of the last AZA situation that we had when we passed our last AZA issue, was that we are a little bit short in our animal care assistance, our zookeeper positions. And so one of the things we're looking at is taking 1.75 animal care assistants that we have right now and converting those into 2 full-time zookeeper positions. I believe the cost associated with this was somewhere around $12,000 to $16,000 annually. But that is something that we would like to bring forward at some point in this next fiscal year as well. And then we've had a lot of discussions with the West Ada School District about adding another potential school-based community center in West Ada. And one of the sites that we've talked about is the Frontier Elementary site, which is also a Title I school in West Ada. Before the COVID-19 situation arose, there was some discussion with West Ada as well about potentially helping participate in funding for that. And so we're still having those conversations, but I think as Mayor and Council are aware, there are some concerns in a lot of the school districts with budget cuts over the next couple of years that are going to impact what they may be doing moving forward. So that funding may or may not be there as we move forward.
Madam Mayor, this is TJ. Hey, thanks. Hey, Doug, thanks for the update. My question is just on the zoo. If you could give me an update. First of all, I was bummed to see that we lost Dean, the alpaca. I know he was a fan favorite. My daughter's not happy about that, just like our community. Hey, I was wondering what animals are still coming in, if any. Have all the ones that were being replaced or new ones, have they been located now at Zoo Boise, or are there others that we can expect?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Thompson, for our latest exhibit with Gorongosa, we're fully animaled up, if you will. I think all of our animals are in right now. There are a number of other different types of animals we're always looking at our AZA membership, fellow membership zoos around the country. And we exchange animals all the time with our AZA partners. And so as we look at that master plan, Councilmember Thompson, and see what refreshing we want to do in some of our exhibits, there's a great possibility that we will move out some animals and bring in some new animals into some different types of exhibits. But I think it would be great to do a refresher for the mayor and council at a work session, future work session, to show you what that master plan looks like, and then talk maybe about what some of those future animals may look like as well.
Thank you. I'd love to play a role in that effort in any way I possibly can. Please put me on your radar.
Great. Thank you, council member.
Madam Mayor. Hi, Doug.
Good morning.
I am beyond thrilled that West Ada is considering a second community center site. It was probably the highlight of last year when we opened that one out at McMillan Elementary, and so it's great that that's successful and that they're excited to do more. I have a question, and the mayor and I have been chatting about this here and there over the past few months about the potential for expanding community centers or after-school programs within the city of Boise to Title I schools too. Are you guys thinking about that? Do I need to keep being more annoying about it? You know, what has to happen so that we can expand this opportunity to more kids in our city?
Madam Mayor, Council Pro Tem Woodings, yes, we do have a few sites that we have talked to the school district about, that they would be very open, and this is the Boise School District, excuse me, that they'd be very open to looking at those sites. Again, funding is the big consideration, and our funding model for the Boise School District is a little bit different than what it is at West Ada, as you are aware, council member. And so, but it's just a matter of us bringing those forward. And if funding was available, we do have a couple of sites we have spoken to the district about that they're on board and taking a look at in the future.
Wonderful, thank you. That's great to know. And I did note that in the PBB rundown that they were ranked in the second quartile for good investment. So I look forward to helping to drive that forward.
Great. Thank you, Council Member. So some of our issues in the next 1 to 4 years, and it's no secret that major repair and maintenance funding is going to be a topic of conversation. We've had a number of these conversations with Eric in budget. Obviously, the financial situation the city's facing, presents a challenge in getting the appropriate amount of major repair and maintenance funding that we feel like we're going to need. We'll do our best internally to try to keep that bubble down as much as possible. And I hate using the term, throwing the Band-Aids out there, but the situation we're in right now is going to require us to really get creative in how we're maintaining our facilities, at least for the next couple of years until we get through this rough financial patch. But some of the things that we'll be looking at doing, we obviously have a lot of aging out playground equipment that we're going to need to get replaced. We have some parking lot repairs, some greenbelt repairs, and something I didn't put on the list is we do have a lot of facility concerns at some of our facilities. Obviously, Ice World has some fairly significant maintenance concerns that we are just kind of limping along and continue to do that. And then we have some greenbelt replacement and repairs that we also need to tackle in the next year to 2 years. So, but we're very cognizant of the financial situation and how that works into this plan. And so hopefully we'll be able to do enough to stay ahead of the bubble. And then once we get back on track, then hopefully we can get a few things done that might have, that we may have to push out just a little bit. Back to the zoo piece again, as you see, we're talking about old section improvements. We did get dinged a little bit in our last audit with AZA on a couple of the current exhibits that we have that are aged out, and we'll be looking at some immediate improvements to them before we go through a new accreditation. But that's all part of that master plan that we discussed on the previous slide. Lowell and South Pools reconstruction, Mayor and Council heard a presentation on this a couple of weeks ago and are aware of what we're looking at with that starting in 21 with some design work. Spalding Ranch, our plan this year before the COVID-19 hit was to make sure we got ground cover planted this year. We're hopeful that we still can get that done so that we can start getting the soil mended and get it ready to do some agricultural planting next year. We did get some 300 various fruit trees planted this year at the site as well. There's still a whole lot that still needs to be done over the next several years, including a lot of work on many of the buildings and outbuildings as well. And Morrison Park improvements. Again, this is a topic Mayor and Council had a couple of weeks ago. We talked about the fountain and some of the other improvements we want to do in the park. And then some of the green up amenities in some parks, Suhau Park. There was some great discussions with the donor of that parcel of land to the city about actually doing the entire green up. Some of the things that have happened in the economy are changing some of those discussions. And, it's going to be more probably of a partnership with the city as opposed to the donor taking that on himself. But we get a lot of questions, probably more about that park site than any other park site right now as to when it's going to be greened up. Alta Harris is moving forward in construction. And as far as amenities, we're hopeful that we'll get, depending on the bid environment and how that ends up looking with the downturn in the economy, maybe we can get some restroom and also some playground built in that first round. We know we're going to get the green up phase done and a shelter done, and we're pretty sure we'll get the restroom done as well. And so that is moving forward. Funding for the sanctuary crew. I know Mayor and Council, you're well aware of the success we have had. It's a pretty small program still. We're running 2 crews in that 12 to 14 employee range. We've seen some great success in transportation acquisition by our guests, and we've also seen some getting into their own housing. It's really been something that's worked very, very well. We would like to expand it a little bit. What we use to fund it right now is our temporary and seasonal wages. And so we're just looking into the future that maybe if we didn't have to rob from seasonal wages, we might be able to find some funding to be able to keep this more of a stable and even grow the program a little bit. And then just our last item is just we do have some remaining parks out there that need their master plans completed with balancing the amenities they still have coming, and also a few parks that still need greened up. I'm happy to share that document with council. We have shared it with you in the past. Council Member Clegg, Council President Clegg requested it a couple of weeks ago. We got that over to her to look at. So that's something we can certainly send out to the entire council so you can get a view of where we're at with all of our park sites as far as what's left to green up and then what's left to get amenities. And I would stand for questions, Madam Mayor and council members, if you have any.
Madam Mayor.
Sure, I didn't see who that was, but go ahead.
It's Council Member Halliburton. I turned my video off again.
Okay.
Doug, good to see you, although you can't see me. I wanted to echo the effectiveness of that sanctuary crew. I've got to see a lot of that firsthand over at the Boise Bicycle Project, and the impact that that's had on some of the folks there. It really is pretty impressive, and the investment there is definitely real. And then I guess I just want to kind of go back to something that Council President Pro Tem Woodings said and kind of echo her sentiment towards those community centers. I think that one of the things that I've been really interested in looking at the budget is the gaps that we've seen in our community, this practice that are just the community center off McMillan. You know, these really are areas where those kids have fewer resources than a lot of other places in town. And those community centers make such an incredible impact. The staff that you have at your other community centers and what they've been able to do and pull off really has solved a lot of those needs. I think that's one of those areas issues of equity. So those community centers, again, I think they should be commended for the incredible work that they've done. And I think they really showcase what a great investment additional funding would be in other ones.
Thank you, council member.
Madam Mayor.
Go ahead.
I know we're running out of time, so I'll try to be quick. Doug, thanks for this list. I'm glad to see the pool still on the list. I still remain concerned about pools this summer. We hope we get through this summer, but thanks for all your hard work during COVID. I know it's been awfully hard to manage the parks, and you guys have done a remarkable job. You know, despite some continuing challenges along that area. So again, thanks a bunch. Just I guess a quick suggestion with both the community centers and the sanctuary crews. It seems like this would be an opportunity for us, again, with some of those signal investments to perhaps use some of the COVID contingency or even some of the federal money if it's eligible for this, to amp up these two services. And then lastly, on your issues on your significant issues list, I guess I'd like to add a few, recognizing that they wouldn't necessarily be city resources, but I think there's some opportunities for some public-private partnerships on some of the things that we've needed for a long time. And if we don't get them on a list, we may not talk about them. Those would include amping up the Arboretum as we work on the City of Trees Challenge and an opportunity for a grant there. The facility, the maintenance facility at Julia Davis Park, and potentially looking at a public-private partnership to relocate that and redevelop that land. And then finally, the clubhouse at Warm Springs Golf Course. Again, I think a real opportunity for a public-private partnership that wouldn't cost the city anything, but would, all of these, I think, offer an opportunity to signal to the community that we're trying to figure out a way to really move into recovery and really provide the things that we need to for them. Thanks.
Madam Mayor.
Thanks. Was that Councilmember Sanchez?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. You know, I just have to say, not just in this situation with COVID-19 and the way it's just affected so many aspects of our city and of our city government, but in the past when we've had crisis here in the city, it's been Parks and Rec who we lean on, who our community can turn to, and who I think people are surprised when they think of Parks and Rec, they think of the fun, and not fully appreciating the way that this particular department really comes to the rescue for a lot of our community members. And so I am just so grateful for the work, Doug, that you and your staff do to meet the needs of the most vulnerable members of our community. And that's all I want to do, is just say thank you and keep up the good work.
Thank you, Councilmember Sanchez.
Well, thank you, Doug. I'll echo everything that council members just said in appreciation. All right, we are getting tight on time, so I'm going to move us quickly. Mark, welcome with a PDS overview.
Yeah, good morning, Madam Mayor and council members. I'll be quick, and most of this is fairly current because it was just last week in the FY20, FY21 FTE authorizations, as you recall. We did add one housing manager, more of a technical position within housing and community development, and then we transferred a transportation position to the mayor's office. We have no additional FTE authorizations or even plans for FY21. Our future investment opportunities, Jade covered this earlier, the urban pathways extensions and master planning for those and the canal easements. We also, for FY20 and FY21, have our zoning ordinance in the plan. From a significant issues perspective, it's, the recession's impact on construction and our operations is still a bit unclear. I would say early on, the team is keeping very busy. Our inspections is just an example. I was just looking at those because we had a report come out on Friday, but we're off about, from the first 11 weeks to the year to the last 9 weeks of the year, we're off only about 8%. However, revenues are off quite a bit in April and May. We're running about 64% of last year. So we're seeing volume, but we're not seeing as many big projects. So we'll continue to monitor that going forward. And I will stand for questions.
Madam Mayor.
Yes, go ahead, council member.
Thank you. It's good to see you, Mark. So my question is regarding that last item on your list, the recession's impact on construction and PDS operations. Has there been a review of what it was like 10 years ago in the last recession, of what that impact was at that time, to give us an idea of what we have coming ahead for us now?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Sanchez.
Go ahead.
Not in detail. We've talked about a few programs. Council President Clegg talked earlier about incentives, or do we do anything relative to around and I talked to Jason about that. We had kind of like a fee deferral program, things like that during the last recession, but we have not done a detailed review of the last recession and likening it to our current situation.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor. Thank you. Just a follow-up, Mark. Thanks. It's good to see you on the my comment on incentives. I was really thinking more along the lines of the kind of incentive that we offered with the downtown housing, but targeted, I think, for those most in need. And also thinking about whether there are little bits and pieces in the zoning ordinance update that we could fast forward as signals to the community that we're open for business, we want their investment, we're trying to make it easy for them. And I don't know what those are, but those are the two things I'd like to have a discussion about. I think that we will have some significant issues. And I think On the other hand, while commercial is going to be slow, I think housing is going to continue to be fast. And given the conditions of COVID, if we're not nimble and if we don't signal to folks that we're really anticipating more housing here, much of that might go to the suburban area, which I think ultimately would just hurt the region if we don't have a balance there. So I'd like a much bigger discussion on this at some point, if we could.
Madam Mayor, Council President Clegg. Yes, I agree with you on that. I would say as part of Grow Our Housing, we are working through a housing incentive program. In fact, that's one of the things that Anna Marie has focused on and will continue on a temporary basis for us. So trying to develop that program so we do send the right message to the community that we are interested in housing. Our single family numbers continue like they, continue to be at a level that they were last year. I would say multifamily is a bit unclear. Smaller projects, yes, we're just unclear on the bigger projects. But I agree with you that we've got to send the right message that we still need housing, and that we still, we're still open for business, and that we want to do that. I also think, we've had conversations with the mayor about, like what you just brought up relative to the ordinance. Are there small incentives, are there small items that we can offer? But we're definitely open for discussion on those items.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Mark, so much for all you've done in prep for this and for the future conversations we'll have very soon on housing.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you all.
And
Great.
Next up, we have police. I'm not seeing Chief. Oh, there you are.
I'm here. Good morning, Madam Mayor, members of the council. Good to be with you. Just jump right in on our first listed item, the completing the construction of the downtown substation. That is still on target. It's a much smaller project than originally envisioned. It's scaled down a bit, but it's meant to house the bike unit and to provide a drop-in briefing space for officers working in the downtown area. And that anticipation date is still, well, it's moved a little bit, but it's now mid-October, and the project is on budget. So we're hopeful for that. The second item is a very, very small project, but one that we're kind of happy that we have to do. When we moved here to City Hall West, we felt like we'd have plenty of space there, but we have continued to hire female officers at a pretty good rate, and we're running out of room in the women's locker room. So that will be done relatively quickly this summer. It should be accomplished. And as far as FTE additions, we lost, or at least I lost the screen. I don't know if anybody else did. But our FTE additions, we've talked about before, adding 5 additional officers, FY20 and FY21. Turns out that's a bit of a challenge. It's a challenge nationwide, but we're seeing it here as well in the recruiting of new officers and training. And certainly with COVID, we've had to push out an academy because we simply haven't been able to interview and hire and start an academy that we originally had planned to do in August. So that will be most likely pushed towards the first of the year. And we're looking at the allocation of officers always between patrol and the specialty positions. Certainly we put a lot of officers back in patrol for the COVID crisis, but we are now moving to go back into those specialties, and we will continue to evaluate when and where we allocate officers in the scheme of things. We will continue to update our staffing plan. We use multiple models in that staffing plan to try to determine exactly how many officers we need. It's sometimes a moving target, but one of those included in our analysis is the police allocation model, and it's called PAM. Uses the performance and service goals, roadway data, and calls for service data to estimate the number of folks that we actually need in our patrol operations. Certainly, one of the things that we have learned is with a crisis like this, we need to be nimble and change and put our resources quickly where we need them. But the need for patrol officers never goes away. So jumping forward to the future investment opportunities, we have been looking at and will be reviewing our pool of vehicles, especially our unmarked vehicles. And we're going to be optimizing our unmarked fleet, which should be a significant savings, we believe. And this is in our priority-based budgeting projects. So our unmarked fleet we're analyzing, and we believe we'll be able to reduce that, save some money. And one of the other things we have embarked on just recently is assigning one of our civilian department members to conduct a task analysis for each position within the department. These are the civilian positions. And we have already found that at least one open position that we have may not need to be filled as we reassign some of that work to other folks. And so we believe we'll be identifying some further savings in that process. One of the significant things we intend to focus on is using technology to reduce some of the need for man hours and manpower. So one of the things that we have identified quite some time ago, but we're going to be moving forward on, is a laser scanner for mapping crashes, crime scenes, and so forth. So it can be used jointly with our detective unit, as well as our crash investigation team and our crime lab. So those opportunities arise that you can use one of these scanners, for instance, to go to a crash scene that we would normally keep an intersection closed for 3 or 4 hours. We might be able to use that scanner and collect all the data we need and produce a 3D model of that crash or that crime scene in just a matter of 20 or 30 minutes instead of several hours. So we hope to use some of those technology savings to reduce our needs for manpower in the future, but we're still trying to keep up. Significant issues coming up 1 to 4 years. We are also currently reviewing our patrol area boundaries, and we believe that will truly drive our discussions for facilities and planning in the future. City Hall West was always designed to be simply a Western District station, so we do believe we're going to need something in the eastern part of the city as growth continues out there. And as we reevaluate our patrol area boundaries, we'll have better information on what that needs to look like. And then lastly, changing technology is always here with the advent of body cameras a few years ago. Those things have driven some change. We also plan to replace our radios in the couple of years. We have been working on that for quite some time, but new technology gives us the opportunity to program those radios over the air instead of actually physically having to collect them and touch each radio. So there's a lot of things coming, tasers, rifle rated shields, certainly the threats to our officers with the use of rifles by our criminal element across the country poses some significant hazards, and we want to keep up with those threats by providing our folks the equipment they need to safely do their job. So trying to be quick, I'm going to sit for questions rather than stand and turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Ron. And I think we will move on. Last but not least, it looks like, is it Public Works? And just an update, we pulled one thing from the executive session, but Steve, that still means you only still have 5 to 7 minutes because we have a hard stop at 12:30 and we need that time.
No problem, Mayor. I knock it out. So just quickly.
And thanks, Ron, for everything, and to your team for everything the last couple months in particular. Welcome back, Steve.
No problem. We were in front of you last week on the enterprise fund, so I just thought it might be useful to show you. We do actually have work in the general fund, Public Works, and we all of our environmental work, engineering. There's a couple of things in engineering, street lights and permitting, and then facility program management. That's Rob Bosefield's group on all the space planning and capital projects. So just give you a sense for some of the stuff that we do in the general fund. Next slide. And then quickly just rolling through this. You gave us one addition this past year. Thank you very much on the Deputy Environmental Division Manager to help us navigate a lot of the environmental work that we're up to. That was back in February. Eric mentioned the streetlight technician. I won't belabor that. Item 3, LED conversion. So we're going to accelerate the streetlight LED conversion. And by doing so, we'll be able to realize about $75,000 more in savings over the next 5 years. And so that's proposed in FY21. Eric already mentioned the energy initiatives to follow through on Boise's energy future. Future investment opportunities. We're going to be completing the climate action plan this year and next, but we don't have any long-term funding set up for that on any actions that might be required. So we may be back in front of you asking for additional funding. And then the water resources integrated plan, we're trying to develop a kind of broader approach for Boise to try to better integrate drinking water, surface water irrigation, potential for wastewater reuse, and see how we can do it better in Boise. Right now, we think there's areas for improvement. So we'd like to develop a plan in the future on how we best do that. And then significant issues in the 1 to 4 year period really just come down to space planning needs, which ironically right now, between probably not hiring as many people in the coming years as we originally thought, and then folks really performing well on the teleworking, we're probably going to be able to address some of those needs easier than we thought. And then Jade had mentioned the on-site childcare is another issue that we're managing through on the space planning front. And that is what I have. I'll stand for questions.
Madam Mayor?
Go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, Steve. So I have a question. Anywhere in all of this, do we have any plans to help the bench deal with their brown water issue?
Madam Mayor, Council Member, that's a really good question. We've been engaged with Suez, requesting them to invest in the bench. They have a couple of proposed projects to try to deal with the brown water issue. We've also been asking them for increased sampling to ensure that there is no lead or copper in the water on the bench, and they've accommodated that. So we're working with them closely. So there are projects moving forward in the coming probably 1 to 2 years to try to get it addressed, and we'll keep working with Suez on making sure that that does get addressed. Good question.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Go ahead.
Thanks. Steve, just put on your radar the same thing I did with parks, and that's a potential private public partnership on an expanded arboretum. I know some of your folks have already had a discussion about that, but just wanted to make sure it was on the list.
We'll do it.
Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you, Steve, very much. Oh, we have contractual services. Who does that?
That would be me if you can hear me.
You're back.
I'm back. Sorry, I lost all internet there. I don't know what happened. I'll just hit briefly on contractual services because it's not a formal department, but there are some significant resources that are allocated. So within that allocation, we fund Allenbaugh House at $300,000, municipal courts at $500,000, our contribution to Idaho Humane Society, and then we also have our annual contribution to VRT. And as we mentioned earlier in the presentation, we allocate 5% of our property tax allocation towards VRT. Within that 8.3 amount for fiscal year 2021, we do have funding for new routes that was approved as part of the current year's budget.
Madam Mayor.
Yep.
Thank you. I know staff has had some ongoing conversations with VRT about strategically using that money this year, as new routes may not be the best use of it. And at some point, I think Jade will bring that back to council for a bigger discussion, but appreciate that. And then a question on the municipal courts. Next year will be $250,000, then it'll be gone. Is that correct, given the new statute?
Thank you, council member. Yeah, I believe there's 2 more years in the phase down where liquor tax receipts are being diverted to support these costs.
Thanks.
Okay, with that, I'm gonna, I wish I could see all staff at once to say, wait, is there another one? Oh, good. Okay, to say thank you to everyone for all the work that went into this. Appreciate all that was done and the conversation we had. Of course, we're gonna be having more. We need to move into executive session. So if any staff members have follow-up thoughts, comments, etc., please please route those through so that the team can get them before the next session that we have on the budget. But with that, Council President, if you'd make a motion to move us into exec session.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Before I make that motion, just real quickly, I'll echo Madam Mayor. I know that this has been really valuable to the City Council to get these updates. I know all of you have been just working so hard behind the scenes to deal with COVID and deal with building a budget and thinking forward all at the same time. And I can't tell you how much we appreciate it. With that, I would move that we go into executive session pending litigation and land acquisition, Idaho Code 742061C and F.
Second.
We have a motion and second. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Agent. Yes, and hey, everybody. Hopeful meeting for me. Thank you.
Clegg.
Yes.
Halliburton.
Yes.
Sanchez.
Yes.
Thompson.
Yes.
Woodings.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
All right, now just a reminder to everybody to fully close this out and we'll meet you on the other side.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.